computer. No, you heard it from her mouth to your ears. Anyway, I have been asked by approximately a half a dozen to a dozen people, could you send me the link to, or did you record this, that, or the other? What I will tell you is that I now have, as of tonight, I will have recordings for, if you need to write this down, 527, 610, 617, and 624. That's tonight. So I'm going to have 4 out of the 6. The other 2 have been lost to all posterior, pun intended. Thank you, Rod. At any rate, here's what's happened with our recordings. Because the Zoom link and invitation that came to you was generated through HUC. When I recorded these, it was recorded to the cloud, but to JUC's chunk of the cloud. They have a relatively limited amount of space that they've purchased to house recordings. And so for whatever reason, I don't know how Zoom chooses what to delete and keep, but for whatever reason, the 2 sessions that didn't get, that's not on that list that I just gave you, those are gone, like forever. Now, if you happen to have missed and you just have a burning passion for whatever the subject matter was that night, then you can email me and I will send you what I have from that night as far as like PowerPoint presentations or some kind of document that I shared or something like that. But as far as having a recording for those 2 sessions, those don't exist functionally. Another thing about the recordings, the reason, first of all, let me apologize for not responding to most of the people who have written in and asked for this session or that, because the reason that I didn't do it is because I didn't have anything to tell you. I have worked and worked and worked, and there has been barrier after barrier of access to the material. Just finding where the material was actually was the first barrier, then gaining access to the material, or having it sent to me. And then after it was sent to me, then I had access problems because I wasn't given some kind of like administrator privileges or whatever. Then we got over that barrier. And then the question was, where do I house this? Can't go back on JUC's thing because that could end up going away. So we have decided that we are going to put it on Wave Nunnally YouTube, all lowercase, all one word, WAVENUNNALLY, just lots of N's and lots of L's. And I'll show it at the very end of our time together tonight. You can write that down, and that's where these will be for you. And they will be there for an entire month. So you'll have 4 out of the 6 videos, 4 out of the 6 nights that has a video attached to it. The 2 that don't have videos, you can, if you have need of some stuff that we covered that night, then you can email me personally, nunnallyw@evangel.edu, and I will send you the stuff that you request. You have to tell me what night it was or what the subject was, though, because mind reading's not biblical. So sorry about that. Kind of hung out to dry on that. All right. Next thing I wanted to mention to you is that I think JUC already has up on its website the full slate of fall courses. Some of those are online, like this one. Some of them are available, as I understand, for not for credit or not for degree. You know, like most of you would probably fall into one of those 2 categories or both. And you can just take a look at what they've got online. I don't have a list, but it's online. So just, the JUC website. One other thing. There was one other thing. What was it? I know what it is. Now I have to share a screen. Are you okay with that? All right, let's do that. We are going to go miracles. Tonight, our subject matter is miracles of Jesus. Now, last week, in a kind of a post-class session, I did some of the stuff that was planned for the session. That's going to be on the recording from last week. That was 6:17. So if you happen to have dialed out, that nothing's lost because it's on that 6:17 recording. I talked about Jesus' use of visual aids and how that changes from an agrarian Galilean setting to an urban like Jerusalem setting. His points of reference are different. And then, after you hear that, you go, oh yeah, obviously I've been reading my Bible all my Christian life, and I've read that kind of stuff, and it all kind of connects and makes sense. Then you can start reading your Bible in light of that. But then I didn't get to one of the things that I wanted to cover last week, and that was the parable of the Good Samaritan as an example of Jesus' storytelling or parable telling and his teaching ministry involving parables. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an extended session tonight. It will be recorded in the same recording for 624. And if you have to leave, not a problem. It's going to be there on Wave Nunnally YouTube, and you can listen to it anytime you want between now and a month from now. But I'm going to do that. I'm going to circle back to our Jesus the Teacher, and I'm going to finish that up, not in the 7 to 8:30 session that we're in now, but in like 8:30 to 9 o'clock tonight. I'll be addressing Jesus, one of his best known parables, the parable of the Good Samaritan. So just know that so that you understand kind of what's going to be, what's going on, big picture. All right, so this is the last little sort of PSA that we've got going here, and that's this study on site in the land of Israel in July of 2022. It's approximately a 2-week study of Jesus in his original setting, kind of some of the stuff that we've been doing in this class, but lots and lots more because it's all day long, every day that we're there. And it's just kind of pedal to the metal, you push all of the Jesus I can push into you in those 2 weeks-ish. So note to self, if that's something of interest to you, you should note though that it is in July. So to whom it concerns, it's the early to middle July, and we will be on a slow bake. All right, tonight's session is miracles of Jesus. And what I want to do is I want to look at 4 different areas in the miracles of Jesus. I want to take a look at an example of Jesus' nature miracles, Jesus' healing ministry, Jesus' deliverance or exorcistic ministry, and then Jesus' resurrection ministry. We'll just kind of take it in those 4 categories. I don't think that those are arbitrary. I think that those are good, solid categories that give the most coverage to this miraculous ministry of Jesus. And the reason why that I wanted to even start working and picking at this area of Jesus' life is that most people don't do it. They seem to be content. Most of scholarship and courses like this seem to be focused on the words of Jesus, as opposed to, for example, his early life. We did some stuff on that, education, early education, his personal piety. We've done sessions on all of that stuff. And now we're going to spend this hour and a half-ish on the miracles of Jesus. Again, I have muted everybody, but you have the ability to unmute if you need to raise an objection, ask a question, make a comment. Feel free to do that by depressing your space bar for as long as you're speaking, and then you can let it up, and then we'll go from there. So miracles of Jesus. Why are we studying Jesus' miracles? And what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at these miracles in context in the same way that we've looked at other stuff that Jesus has done. Instead of looking at Jesus as an alien or in a bubble or siloed apart from everything else that's going on in his world, what we see is this master communicator, majorly in touch with his world, majorly in touch with his audience and their needs and limitations. And so we're going to look at Jesus' miracle working ministry within that context as well, so that we place ourselves in a position of being a little bit more, functioning more when we come at these narratives, more like an insider rather than an outsider reading somebody else's mail, more like an original participant. Not perfect, we're never going to be there, but as close as possible to being a part of that first century Jewish community, living in the land of Israel, trying to live out a dynamic walk with God, and then coming in contact with this major figure that changes history. So the method that we're going to do is that we're going to apply is pay attention to original context, just like the three rules of real estate or location, location, location. For us, the major rule of Bible understanding or Bible access, Bible interpretation is going to be context, context, context. How would an original reader, hearer, participant in the story have interacted with what was going on in their midst? So the first area is nature miracle, kind of like stilling the storm or multiplying the fishes and bread and stuff. And we're going to look, I intentionally chose this one, y'all, no kidding, because it's the most bizarre on purpose. Why? Because then it becomes a litmus test of, okay, it sounds bizarre to us, but is it really bizarre in the first century world of Judaism in the land, the world of Jesus? So it's this one, this miraculous travel. It's the only example that we have in Jesus' life, so we've got to pick on this one. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, and after getting into a boat, they started to cross the sea to Capernaum. And it had already become dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. So they're out on the Sea of Galilee, and they're going from one side to the other, and they're headed to Capernaum, where Jesus' base of ministry was. Verse 18, the sea began to be stirred up because of a strong wind that was blowing. When therefore they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles. Okay, now understand that the Sea of Galilee is 13 miles long, north to south, and it's about 7 miles wide from east to west or west to east. All right, so what that means is that they're out, if they've rowed 3 or 4 miles, they're probably somewhere in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. And then they see Jesus walking on the water in the midst of this strong wind and coming near the boat, and they were afraid. But he said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." So they were willing to receive him into the boat. And immediately, this is the underlined part, immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. They arrived at Capernaum like in the twinkling of an eye. So from somewhere in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, 3 miles of sea travel are accomplished in a moment, in the blink of an eye. This would be what people sometimes call miraculous transport or spirit transport or something like that. The term doesn't really matter. Everybody knows what we're talking about. So my question is this a one-off? Is this a once in a lifetime kind of thing? This is a one-time only event. Totally unusual, nothing else to compare to that in all of Scripture. And what we find is, well, no, actually in the New Testament, we don't even have to go outside the New Testament, and we hear about spirit transport or miraculous travel, whatever you want to call it, in Acts 8, where after the baptizing the Ethiopian eunuch, Philip the deacon was snatched away by the Spirit of the Lord. And even though he was on the way to Gaza, He was found at Azotus, which is Old Testament Ashdod, actually closer to Tel Aviv than to the Gaza Strip. And so a major direction change for Philip. And this is miles and miles apart. So I guess if you're counting frequent flyer miles or whatever, he is really good to go. But you do definitely have miraculous transport. The Spirit of the Lord snatched Philip away, and that it can only be, especially in light of verse 40, explained that way. Now we go to the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible, and in Bereshit or Genesis, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, because God took him. And look, I can guarantee you that he didn't get to heaven and in the presence of God using Jacob's ladder, an escalator, or a spaceship. Just not happening. And so this is, in some measure, should be understood, I think, in the category of miraculous travel or spirit transport. First Kings, and this probably came to your mind when we started teeing up the subject, and that is the issue of Elijah. This guy Obadiah, who was a servant of King Ahab, he says, look, if I leave and the Spirit of the Lord carries you or snatches you away, then when I tell Ahab and he can't find you, he's going to kill me because he's going to think I lied to him. So Obadiah knows that Elijah's experiencing spirit transport. You're going to find this again at the end of Elijah's life. In 2 Kings, we hear about Elijah's miraculous transport up into heaven. Elijah went up by a whirlwind, via a whirlwind, to heaven. Okay, again, not normal or natural travel, something that is an act of God. Elisha saw it, and then he saw him no more. In 2 Kings, we also hear about this, that the sons of the prophets, the disciples of the prophets, come to Elisha and say, look, we've got a bunch of strong guys here. Let us go and do a body search. Maybe the Spirit of the Lord has taken him up, look at this, and cast him on some mountain or into some valley. In other words, these people also, not just that guy Obadiah who worked for the king of the northern kingdom, Ahab, but these guys also are aware that evidently this is going on. I'm not going to say on a regular basis, but they knew it was a possibility with Elijah. So, hey, we've experienced this before. Maybe this is another one of those events, and they don't know. They weren't there like Elisha was when the whirlwind took him. So they default to the next closest thing that makes sense to them. The Spirit of the Lord took him up and has deposited him somewhere other than where we are now. Now, you may have also thought of Ezekiel, and I only picked a couple of examples from Ezekiel, but there are a bunch of them. Ezekiel 8, Ezekiel 11, Ezekiel 37, they're just kind of spread out. They go from the beginning of Ezekiel all the way to the end of Ezekiel, these examples of spirit travel. So I just picked a couple. God stretched out the form of a hand and caught me by the hair of my head, and the Spirit lifted me up between earth and heaven and brought me in the visions of God to Jerusalem. Now, where did he start? He started in Babylon, Bavel, because he's in exile. So some kind of way he's experiencing this. Spirit lifted me up and took me to Jerusalem. So spirit transport, absolutely. Chapter 11, the Spirit lifted me up and brought me to the east gate of the Lord's house. And then the Spirit of the Lord lifted me up in a vision and brought me to the exiles in Babylon, in Chaldea. So we've got the Spirit of the Lord taking Ezekiel from Babylon to Israel, and then from Israel back to Babylon. I guess you could call that a round trip. In addition to the stuff that we have in the Hebrew Bible, we have stuff in the intertestamental period. This text that's called Bel and the Dragon comes to us from a group of additions to Daniel that are included in the Septuagint. So this stuff has been around, for a couple of hundred years, probably by the time that Jesus, Paul, and John the Baptist come along. And it says in Bel and the Dragon, it's only one chapter long, so there are only verse numbers involved. The prophet Habakkuk was in Judea, he had boiled soup and had broken bread into a bowl, was going into the field to take it to the reapers. But the angel of the Lord said to Habakkuk, take the dinner which you have to Babylon, to Daniel in the lion's den. Now Habakkuk said, sir, I have never been to Babylon. I don't know anything about the den. So the angel of the Lord took him by the crown of his head, think Elijah, by the hair of his head, took him up by the crown of his head and lifted him by his hair and set him down in Babylon, right over the den. Listen to this, with the rushing sound of the wind itself. Compare, for example, the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2, verse 2, and just the terminology that's used there. So Daniel arose and ate, and the angel of God immediately returned. I've got to move some stuff. Returned Habakkuk to his own place. So he got the round trip treatment as well. Nice. Okay, now we go to the material from the rabbis. The angel of the Lord transported when Jacob, this is what the rabbis are saying, Genesis 32, I believe it is, around there, where he's coming back from Aram and from getting his wives and children and flocks and herds and stuff. He's coming back to the land of Israel. He gets to the Jordan River. He's going to cross over, or actually it's the Jabbok. And it says that Jacob's flocks and herds, the angel transported them in the twinkling of an eye, which, by the way, is interesting language that you're going to get in the New Testament, that that Jesus is going to return in the twinkling of an eye. It means just in a heartbeat, very short period of time. Whereas Jacob took some across, returned, found more, took some more across, etc. So this is, according to the rabbis, it's going on in the days of Jacob as well, and their teaching of that event in the book of Genesis. And another rabbinic text, we hear a very interesting story about one of these Hasidim, one of these miracle working rabbis from the land of Israel in the. Hang on just a second. I just got disconnected from my power source. Not exactly sure how that happened, but all right, back online. He's one of the miracle working rabbis from Galilee, and he's a first century person. So he's living in the time of Jesus and the apostles. And it says that this guy, Hanina ben Dosa, saw the men of his town taking burnt offerings and peace offerings up to Jerusalem. And he says, they're all taking peace offerings up to Jerusalem, and I can take nothing. He was a poor stone worker. Okay. Read, for example, because this is what stone workers were, carpenter. The word tekton means one working more with stone than with wood. Wood, yes, when need be, like for roof rafters, but stone for walls and that dividers and that sort of thing. So this is a poor carpenter. Foxes have their holes, birds of the air have their nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. And these guys are known for their intentional poverty. They give money away when they have any extra and all this stuff. So what am I going to do? What am I supposed to do? Immediately, he went out to the wasteland of his town and found there a stone, which he chipped and chiseled and polished and painted. And then he said, I vow to carry this up to Jerusalem. It's for the building of the temple building was going on still. And he wanted to hire some carriers. And he said to them, will you take this stone up to Jerusalem for me? They said, yeah, if you pay us this, large amount of money, then we will do it for you. But he didn't have the money, so they left. Immediately, the Holy One, blessed be he, a nickname for God. Remember that the high priest asked Jesus, Caiaphas said, tell us plainly, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? Okay, so there's a nickname for God. I have a video on nicknames for God that is out there on the YouTube channel. So the Holy One, blessed be he, placed in his way 5 angels who had taken on the form of men. They said to him, Master, give us 5 selahs and we will take your stone to Jerusalem. However, you have to put your hand and finger with ours. He placed his hand and finger with theirs, and immediately they found themselves standing in Jerusalem. So this is in a twinkling of an eye. this is carrying a large worked stone for the rebuilding of the temple from Galilee all the way to Jerusalem, which is without carrying a large, a major burden like that, it's a 2-day journey. So there you go. You've got, is it unusual then, based on what we read in the other places in the New Testament, read in the Hebrew Bible, heard from the intertestamental literature like Bel and the Dragon, or from the works of the rabbis? Would you say, if you were a first century Jew living in the land of Israel and you read that thing or heard that story about that's reported in the Gospel of John chapter 6, and you heard that, you would go, that's just weird. Sorry, I can't go there with you. Would that be your gut level response? And the survey says, no, not at all. Let me stop share for just a second and see if you've got any responses to that first out of 4 sections on nature miracles.
Dr. Nunnally.
Yes.
Elisa. Yes. What would that have meant probably to these people hearing it then? What would they have identified, knowing that they've heard this in other stories and talked about it? What would that have meant to them, that it was?
This Jesus must be a character, an individual. I don't mean character like somebody that's weird. Must be an individual that is along the stream of Elijah, Elisha, Hanina ben Dosa. In other words, instead of just, freaking them out and they light their hair on fire and run around the building, they go, there must be something more to this guy. And, Jesus makes this appeal. Okay, you don't believe my words. Well, at least believe the works. And then if you believe the works that I'm doing, then you should believe what I say. It's almost that kind of argument. And so a very powerful polemic or apologetic or whatever for accepting Jesus for who he was and accepting his authority for teaching the things that he taught. But not a once in the history of mankind, something as odd as it would be to us. I mean, have any of you guys ever experienced spirit transport? I can tell you that I haven't. Okay. It doesn't mean either any of us are bad. It's just unusual in our world. What I was trying to do by invoking all of those various texts from the Old Testament, intertestamental period rabbis is to say, in that world, it fit in quite well and did exactly what Jesus intended for these kinds of things to do, which is to affirm his authority to preach and teach the stuff he was preaching and teaching, and affirmed his claim for who he was. As opposed to in our world, if you claim to, hey, you know what, I walked on water the other day, it was a great day at the office, and people in our world would go, yes, and you're a professional weirdo. That's two completely, we are not there. We aren't them. We're not first century. We're not land of Israel Jews, Hebrew speaking 20 centuries ago. We're ships passing in the night until we start paying attention to Jesus in his world. And in a sense, that's what we've been doing for these 6 weeks, is trying to get a clearer look, a fresh look at a Jesus who fit perfectly into his time. And instead of repulsing and scaring people, he was attractive to people. And these are coherent, believable events to someone who is a contemporary of Jesus. It's a difference between a 21st century, scientific method. We got to be able to measure this or put it in a beaker. We got to test it, ad nauseum. Or are we people that have this kind of worldview that says, yes, the miraculous is normal. God does this kind of stuff. He loves us. He takes care of his people. He does unusual things, and thank God for it. He's awesome. And then they roll with it. Just completely different, attitudes. So one of the reasons why we hear It's unusual that we will hear about, substantiated miracle in the United States. You just hear about miracle in places like, sub-Saharan Africa all the time, because it's a part of their understanding of the way that the world works and how God cares for people. We've come to all kinds of interesting and strange conclusions about the miraculous that some of them may be warranted. I think a lot of them aren't. I think that they're us overlaying onto biblical texts and onto the character of God, who we think or need him to be safe. Thanks for the question. Anybody got anything else before we jump into section 2?
Well, can I kind of
Go ahead.
that real quick? So these rabbinic examples of miracles, beam me up, Scotty, and stuff like that. Do you take those as inherently authentic?
I think that there's something to it because the dots connect. On the other hand, are all of those details in that story about Hanina Mendoza, for example, and there are tons of stories about that particular person. He's usually associated with the miraculous, this Hanina Mendoza character. But are all of the details, quote, historical, verifiable, etc.? The point that I'm trying to make is that the very people who are telling those stories and the folks that were listening and were believing those stories is demonstrating to us that there was this belief in the miraculous. Now, so we have to ask, great question, James, because, when Jesus does some sort of a miracle, like he heals from a distance or he casts demons out with a word, usually you'll have a follow-up statement in the Gospels, and the people were amazed with what authority this one it's not as one of our scribes, or they were amazed at what manner of man is this. We translate that amazement into, my gosh, they've never seen anything like this before. And the reality of it is, I hope by the time you get to the end of tonight, you'll go, you know what? Jesus just so fit in. He was not going around trying to freak people out on purpose. He's trying to weird everybody out so then he can, hit them with the good stuff while they're off balance. That's almost, as I understand it, that's the attitude I used to have about Jesus. He just went around and he'd heal a bunch of people. Everybody'd freak out. And then while he was sitting there, like just completely plastered to the rock behind him, then while he's sitting still long enough, he hit them with the good stuff of his teaching. I don't see that as a merciful, approachable, attractive, God in the flesh. The way that he would approach people is, hey, let me weird them out, and then while I've got them off balance, then I'll hit them with some other new strange stuff. That to me, it just makes sense. The people believed in miracle. Jesus provided for them miracle after miracle after miracle. And people liked that stuff. Thousands and thousands were coming from all over. They wanted to be associated. They weren't running from it and hiding. So I'm hoping that you get this kind of a different, a little bit, not 180 degrees different, but a little fine tuning on this aspect of the nature, character of Jesus. We need to go on to the next section. Is that all right? I'm going to go ahead and go back to share. And I think it's that. Okay, now we're going to do a section on healing miracles. And for that, we're going to focus specifically on Jesus healing by the laying on of hands. There are other modalities, for example, when he heals from a distance, that kind of thing. But I just we don't have time to do everything, so we're going to just take one example. And this covers a good lion's share of these healing miracles. Example, in Mark 5, there was a guy who begged, please come and help my daughter. She's at the point of death. Lay her hands on her that she may get well and live. Okay, so there's healing by the laying on of hands. Mark mentions in chapter 6, he was only able in Nazareth to lay hands on a few sick people and heal them. Most of you are familiar with the stories about Jesus healing blind men. The Gospel of Mark tells a story. John 9 is another one, but here he's taking the blind man by the hand and he spits in his eyes. And this is something that you get in rabbinic literature. We think, oh my gosh, gross me out. Okay, well, they didn't know about germs back in those days. You know, the microscope hadn't been invented. We didn't know anything about viruses and bacteria and that kind of thing. And so this is in this ancient literature that we've been banging around in for, a month and a half. This is a common remedy for problems with the eyes. So when Jesus does it, people are not standing around, like throwing up and stuff like that. That would be our gut level response. I mean, imagine if somebody had in lots of different kinds of churches, there are opportunities for people to come forward and receive the laying on of hands, be prayed for healing and stuff. Imagine if somebody stood up at the front of your church and just started spitting on people that wore glasses, and you're just going, that's nuts. I'm going to have his credentials over that. And then laying his hands on him. So is this normal? Is this common? We're going to ask the same question that we asked in the previous section. Laying his hands upon him, and he asked him, do you see anything? And then a few verses later, he laid his hands on his eyes. He doesn't just lay hands on his head or on his shoulders. He puts his hands on the place where the problem existed. So he puts his hands on his eyes, and the guy is healed of blindness. Amazing stuff. Mark says, this is a disputed text, at least in some areas, some communities. They will pick up serpents, and if they drink any deadly poison, it will not hurt them. They will lay hands on the sick, and they will recover. Well, here's what I'm going to suggest, and I'll tell you where I'm going before I even get there, is that if this was a later addition, then the scribes would not have been able to get away with this later addition to the Gospel of Mark if it wasn't actually happening in those late first century on into early second century churches. Because if it wasn't happening, if this was not accurate in terms of historical reporting, then people would very quickly say, hey, that's not right. That nobody does that, or nobody does that anymore, or something like that. And it would be very quickly discredited. So it's either a part of the original Mark that in some parts of the manuscript materials that we have available to us are the results of possibly damage that comes at the end of the scroll, because it's on the outside, and that's the most often handled and the most often damaged by water, fire, et cetera, Nero's fire in Rome, blah, blah, blah. All right, so that's my thing on Mark. If you don't like it, just forget about that example. Acts chapter 8, we have now Jesus followers doing the same stuff that they saw him do. They began laying their hands on them, and they were receiving the Holy Spirit. So this is for some sort of endowment, of some sort of an empowerment to enable these new Samaritan believers by the laying on of hands of Peter and John. So keep that in your mind, because we're going to go to the Hebrew Bible in just a moment. Also in Acts chapter 9, when Paul is stricken with blindness on the road to Damascus, we get this in Acts 9, Acts 22, and Acts 26. It's in all three reports, but it's here. I just picked out Acts 9. Ananias, laying hands on him, said, Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road by which you were coming, sent me that you might regain your sight. So that's laying on of hands with physical healing. And also be filled with the Holy Spirit. That goes along with what we saw in the previous chapter. Acts 28, the father of Publius, who was a governor, a mayor on one of these small islands in the Mediterranean, his father was sick, had fever and dysentery. Paul went in to see him, and after he had prayed, he laid his hands on him and healed him. Acts 28. So we get it all the way to the end of the book of Acts, that Jesus followers are doing this stuff because they saw Jesus doing that stuff, and they're largely getting the similar results. You get other things in the New Testament, like in 1 Timothy, don't neglect the spiritual gift that's within you, which was bestowed on you through prophetic utterance with the laying on of hands by the presbytery. So again, you get this connection between the laying on of hands and some kind of consecration for office or empowerment for service. And so now let's look at the Hebrew Bible. It says here, I'm going to drag that out of the way, that Jacob, Israel, stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, and crossing hands put his left hand on the head of Manasseh. This is to confer a blessing. There's the picture there that kind of gives you a little eye candy, but that's the point, is that Jacob is blessing these two sons of his. They're actually grandsons, sons of Joseph. And he's doing that by the laying on of hands, conference of blessing or empowerment or consecration or whatever by the laying on of hands. Numbers 8, present the Levites before Yahweh, and the sons of Israel will lay their hands on the Levites. This is an act of consecration. You get that kind of thing in, for example, Acts chapter 6 about the laying hands on the first set of 7 deacons. In Numbers 27, the Lord tells Moses, take Joshua, the son of Nun, a man in whom the Spirit is, and lay your hand on him. Then he laid his hands on him and commissioned him. So again, this laying on of hands, it's for a bunch of different things, both in the New Testament, but also in the prefigured or kind of verified, standardized by practice in the Old Testament. It's for healing. It's for empowerment. It's for consecration. That setting apart for some special act of service or whatever. Laid his hands on him and commissioned him as the Lord commanded him. Now we go from the Hebrew Bible to the intertestamental period. If you see the 1Q, any number here and then Q tells you that this material is coming from. Can somebody help me out here?
Dead Sea Scrolls.
Dead Sea Scrolls.
The Dead Sea Scrolls. Q stands for Qumran, exactly. I think we'd covered that before. So this is the Genesis Apocryphon, and it is a kind of a rewrite of the story of Abraham's life. So it says here that, looking for my pointer, none of the physicians, magicians, sages were able to endure so as to heal him, the problem with Pharaoh. So the servant of Pharaoh came beseeching me, this is Abraham, to go to the king and to pray for him and to lay my hands upon him so that he might live. So I got to move this again. So I prayed for him and laid my hands on his head, and the scourge departed from him. So there you have in a very clearly pre-Christian intertestamental text, the healing by the laying on of hands. Healing by the laying on of hands. Not sure why it's skipping around so bad, but now we have another text. This is a rabbinic text, Bereshit Rabbah. It's a kind of a verse-by-verse commentary on the book of Genesis. Elijah of blessed memory came before Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the guy who collated, edited, put together, published the Mishnah. Very important rabbi, disguised as Rabbi Chia and the elder, and he laid his hand upon his teeth and cured him. Now, when this, if you read earlier in the story, this Rabbi Yehuda Nasi had a toothache for 12 years, according to this story. When Rabbi Chia subsequently visited Rabbi, he asked him, "How is your tooth?" And this is what Yehuda Nasi says to him: "Since you laid your hand upon it, it is cured," he answered. Okay, so the laying on of hands, kind of like with Jesus, where he lays his hands the second time, specifically on the spot of the body that was the problem. Okay, I'm going to talk next about deliverance, about exorcism. So before we go there, I'll get rid of that stop share for a minute and ask you if you have any comments or questions about section number 2. the one on healing by the laying on of hands. I know this is eclectic, but goodness gracious, we got 4 gospels we're trying to deal with here. And there's, if there's one thing Jesus did a lot of, it's healing. So by its nature, we've got to be a little bit selective, or we're here until Jesus comes back.
I had a question about the first section, but it might refer to all of them. I know that the miracles were to demonstrate Jesus' authority over nature, over sickness and other things. Did the healings usually come first, or did the words usually come first?
That's a good question. I think that there's probably a variation. I think that you have that kind of thing. You got variation going on in the lives of the apostles as well, so that it's really difficult to nail down some kind of a sequence, an expected or required sequence of events. I think that a lot of the reason, in fact, seems to fit into a pattern or anti-pattern, that Jesus changes up the way that he heals. Sometimes it's from a distance, sometimes it's by the laying on of hands, sometimes it's with mud, sometimes it's with spit. He varies his modality because he's trying to make sure that people don't get the idea that, oh, if I just get the formula right, because if you look at much of the Greek and Demotic spells, it's all about getting the ritual right. It's about getting the formulaic expression correct. And Jesus is doing everything he can to avoid that. So he varies his serve in a way that people cannot come to the conclusion, if I get the sequence right, or if I get the ritual right, then I get the desired result. That's more magic than it is. He's got this dynamic relationship with God the Father, and God the Father is working this incredible power through him to the point that it's not about getting those other things to line up properly. It's about the character of God and the love of God and the covenant loyalty, the chesed of God that is moving this. By the way, I didn't mention this, but Lynn, you kind of jogged my mind to mention that there are 3 primary reasons for miracle that you see. One is miracle reveals the character of God. Another is that miracle meets the need of people, God's creation. And then a third is that miracle is an expression. Every time miracle takes place at the hands of Jesus or the disciples or whatever, it's an example of the inbreaking of, or the extension of, the kingdom of God, which is the rule of God, rule over leprosy, rule over death, rule over demons, rule over nature, whatever it is. It's an expression of God's authority and kingship over all of these kind of out of kilter aspects of the nature that he created perfect, but now isn't. So it's an expansion of kingdom. So those are 3. There may be others that are more nuanced than I am, but those are 3 major ones: character of God, needs of people, and then extension of kingdom. I hope that helps in some way.
Yeah,
Pat?
Dr. Pat Smith. So would you say that John 20, 30, 31, about these miracles have been done or recorded so that you will believe, that believe is kind of an overarching or a thread that runs through all those 3 that you've just cited? How would you just quickly draw that signs and wonders of miracles are done so that people will know who Jesus is?
Yeah, that's that's maybe a 4th category that maybe we should add to it, Pat, is that these are confirming Jesus' identity and authority. One of the greatest of all miracles, or maybe the greatest, is Jesus' bodily resurrection from the dead, right? And what Paul says in Romans chapter 1, and I believe it's verse 4, I may be wrong about that. It might be further down in the chapter. It says that that God declared him to be Son of God in power. by his resurrection from the dead. So that goes along with that. One of the major reasons for Jesus coming back from the dead was to kind of put an exclamation point on everything that he'd done in his entire life, his miracles, his teaching, his declarations about himself, his identity as being God in the flesh, Messiah, Yahweh incarnate, etc. All of that is then, according to Paul, is validated. All those claims are affirmed or confirmed by this incredible return of Jesus from the dead after this horrible, humiliating death. So yes, you're totally right, Pat, and at the point well taken. Thank you. Anybody else before we move on to point number 3, section 3? We're working hard and having fun now, aren't we? Okay, so Jesus' miracles of deliverance. Or exorcism, whatever you want to call these, being able to successfully expel demonic presences from the bodies and the persons of people. So we have plenty of these examples, and I was just going to start with a couple. Matthew 9. When the demon was cast out, the dumb man spoke, and the multitudes were marveling, saying, nothing like this was ever seen in Israel. So from text like that, many people will come to the conclusion that, wow, this is the first time anybody had ever recognized maybe that there were demons that existed, or that demons could inhabit human beings' bodies, or that certain people using certain means would be able to successfully remove those demons from people's bodies. What is the nothing referring to? What we assume as Westerners, again, is like, these are just really weird kind of, Hollywood movies, like The Exorcist or The Omen or whatever, that this is just totally bizarro world kind of stuff. It's all weird. None of it fits into our 20th century, 21st century, westernized, kind of empirically oriented world. Nothing like this was ever seen before. And so we take the nothing and we apply that to everything, the whole gambit of, everything in these reports. I question that, and when you get to the end of the stuff that I'm going to share with you, and there's tons more, I had to cut it out because of time. If you like, you can ask at the end of our session, and I'll be happy to get this posted by JUC on that sharing page where you get your other information. Oh, and by the way, the things that I was asked to get posted on there, I did post those. There were a couple of documents that were asked for last time. You just go back and see what those were. Make sure that, okay, so Luke 23:31 and Ezekiel, and then the enemies of Jesus. Both of those are now on that sharing network belonging to JUC. I just wanted you to know that. Forgotten to mention it at the beginning. Anyway, I'm hoping that by the time you get to the end of this section, that you will see that yet again, what's happening with Jesus is not freaking people out. They love this stuff. They embrace it readily. It's not something brand new to them, or just completely so unusual that that the whole thing, the whole cloth, totally never seen anything, never heard anything like this before. I'm hoping to dispel, disabuse everyone of that idea so that we can focus on that which has not been seen in Israel. All right, so we get also Luke chapter 4, the man in the synagogue. I know who you are, the Holy One of God. And Jesus says, be quiet and come out of him. That's about typically what Jesus has to say to demons. He doesn't sit around and put them in the witness protection program like so many Pentecostal charismatic, believers are doing, and promising them certain things like, I won't make you wander in the dry places, or, put you into a doorstop or something like that. Jesus just usually will deal with demonic presences like shut up and come out. That's about the extent of his interaction with a demonic presence. So the demon came out, had thrown him down in their midst. That's going to be seen to be pretty typical. Amazement came on them all. They began discussing, what is this message? With authority and power, he commands the unclean spirits, and they come out. Again, what is it that they are responding? What is it that they're seeing that is unique to Jesus and his treatment of situations such as this? Luke 9. Teacher, I beg you to look at my son. A spirit seizes him. He suddenly screams, throws him into convulsion, foaming at the mouth, and it mauls him and scarcely leaves him. And I begged your disciples to cast it out, and they could not. Jesus says, you unbelieving, perverted generation, how long will I be with you? And the demon dashed him to the ground and threw him into a convulsion. Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit and gave him back to his father. Again, look at how simple this is. Be quiet, come out, and gave him back to his father. And they were all amazed at the greatness of God, and everyone was marveling at all that he was doing. Now, here's the longest of all of the reports in any of the Gospels. Mark's, even though Mark is the shortest Gospel, in this section and in other sections as well, Mark is found to be the longest of the reports of an event in the life of Jesus. This is about the Gerasene or Gadarene demoniac. Jesus got out of the boat, and a man from the tombs met him. No one was able to bind him, even with a chain. He's demon possessed. He'd been bound with shackles, broke the shackles in pieces. Nobody strong enough to subdue him. He was living among the tombs. He was crying out, gashing himself with stones. Seeing Jesus from a distance, he bows down before him. So he's, whether it's the man or it's the demon in the man, they're admitting that there's a presence greater than them there, and they are submitting to it, crying out with a loud voice. And I'm skipping some in this. What have I had to do with you, Jesus of Nazareth, Son of Most High God? I implore you by God, do not torment me, because Jesus had been saying to him, come out. For those of you who know the Hebrew language, this is in a one-word phrase. It's from the root yatzah, which means to go out or to come out. And the command is tseh, Sadi Aleph, tseh. I want you to hold on to that, because you're going to see it again later, come out of the mouth of another rabbi in the late first, early second century AD. Come out of the man, you unclean spirit. And he was asking him, what is your name? He said, Legion, for we are many. Send us into the pigs so that we may enter them. Coming out, the unclean spirits entered the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea. That's the Sea of Galilee, about 2,000 of them. And they were drowned in the Sea of Galilee. It blew everybody's mind, and they went off and told the townspeople, and they came out to check out what had happened. So what exactly has happened there? I think that we took our eye off the ball, probably for about the last 2,000 years, and we have focused on the pigs. Well, there's got to be a reason, because Jesus is not anti-animal. Well, maybe it's because the pigs weren't supposed to be there because they're unclean animals. We're off trying to sandbag Jesus's position vis-a-vis the pigs, instead of dealing with Jesus. The story is not about the pigs. The story is about Jesus. And that's usually a good way to dial back into what the Bible's focusing on, because the Bible's always going to focus on Jesus, not on the demons, not on the pigs, not on the townspeople, not even on Legion, the guy. But the focus is, the spotlight is always on God in the Bible. It's not on us. The Bible's not a book about us. It's a book about him. And this is just sort of a microcosm of it. So let's take a look around at the literature surrounding Look at Jesus' Bible. Do we have demon possession in the Hebrew Bible survey says? Yes. One example, this is all that I can come up with. In 1 Samuel 16, we hear about Saul, who is tormented by an evil spirit. An evil spirit from the Lord terrorized him. So whenever the evil spirit from God came to Saul, David would take a harp and play it with his hand, and Saul would be refreshed and the evil spirit would leave him. So that's something. Maybe it's not classic first century demon possession. Maybe it is. I'll let you make that call. But the point is, there are evil spirits and that are known about, and they're afflicting human beings. And then David is known to have the ability to ameliorate that situation some kind of way. That's all that I've got for the Hebrew Bible. So now we go intertestamental. And sure enough, in the 3rd century BC, we have the book in the what is called the Old Testament Apocrypha. And I know that by now you guys know that we're not dealing with that New Testament Apocrypha stuff from the 2nd to the 5th centuries AD, a lot of which is Gnostic and heretical or heresy. But rather we're dealing with the apocryphal stuff from between the Testaments, pre-Christian Jewish stuff, most of which is written in Hebrew in the land of Israel, like the book of Tobit. So Tobit is written 3rd century BC, and it talks about 7 sons of a certain husband and wife, 7 brothers, and they have all married the same woman from the, I guess, oldest to the youngest, and the first 6 have died. Why? Because of the presence of or the activity of some kind of demon. Don't worry about the demons, the angel tells the 7th of the guys. I'm going to take care. We're going to make sure that you are taken care of, and it doesn't happen to you like it happens to your happened to your 6th brother. By the way, when you get to Matthew chapter 22, the Sadducees come to Jesus and they ask him this theoretical question. There was a woman who was married to 7 brothers. This is Levirate marriage. You hear about this in the law of Moses, that if a man dies childless, then his brothers that remain after him are responsible for marrying the woman and raising up children to their dead brother. So this is standard Jewish practice. It's not something weird and, like something that happened in early Mormonism or whatever. This is not classic polygamy or whatever. It's required, not even optional. It's required. It's what's happening with Ruth. That a kinsman redeemer has to marry Ruth because that person has to do this service for their dead kinsman, the guy that died over in Moab. All right, so don't worry about the demon. This night she'll be given to you in marriage. So this is the story that is probably behind that question the Sadducees asked Jesus in Matthew 22. When you enter the bridal chamber, you take live ashes of incense, lay them on some of the heart and liver of the fish so as to make a smoke. Then the demon will smell it and flee away and never return again. So there's the removal of a demonic presence, but it's done by some kind of modality. Live ashes, incense, heart, fish, liver, smoke, etc. Keep that in mind. Again, in Tobit, we hear about taking live ashes and stuff like that. So it's in a couple of different passages in the book of Tobit, 3rd century BC. Now we come to 11Q5 Psalms text from, where's this stuff coming from, y'all?
Dead Sea Scrolls.
Absolutely, because the Q stands for?
Qumran.
Exactly, Qumran. Right. So it says, David, the son of Jesse, composed songs to be sung over the possessed. And they know how many he composed. The Dead Sea community thinks that they still have those 4 hymns. We have another Dead Sea text, 11Q Apocryphal Psalms. In the name of Yahweh and of Solomon, and he will invoke the name of Yahweh, and he will set free, to set him free from every affliction of the spirit of the devils. Now we have another Dead Sea text. Anytime you've got that Q thing, the 4 is just the number of the cave. The number after the Q is the number of the document. So from cave 4, document number 242, this is prayer of Nabonidus. An exorcist forgave my sin. He was a Jew from among the exilees in Babylon. So this is an interesting text because it's specifically connecting Jewish people to exorcism. That's something that you find even in the book of Acts. Josephus, 1st century Jewish historian who's writing at the same time the Gospels are being composed. This is what Josephus tells us. There is a root of a plant, that if it be only brought to sick persons, it quickly drives away those called demons that enter into men that are alive and kill them unless they can get some help against them. So again, there's a modality, like with Tobit and the ashes and the incense and the liver and the heart and the smoke and all that. Now there's a root that will drive them out. Josephus also talks about when the divine power departed from King Saul, some strange and demonic disorders came upon him and brought upon him such suffocations as were ready to choke him. I'm not sure where he gets all of this. It's not in the Hebrew Bible because we read that 1 Samuel 16 passage. But this is what Josephus is saying. And so assumedly then, people in the land of Israel in the 1st century, this is a kind of common storytelling that was going on that Josephus is adding to the biblical narrative, for which physicians could find no other remedy other than this. What is the this? To observe when these demons came upon him, for David charmed his passion and was the only physician against the trouble he had from demons. Whenever it was that they came upon him, by reciting hymns and playing upon the harp, he could bring Saul to his right mind. So like with the fish, like with the root, like with now with the hymns and the playing of the harp, you're getting modalities, methods, means by which the demons are being successfully dealt with. Josephus also talks about Solomon, who was enabled to learn a skill that expels demons. So David and Solomon are the two primary names other than the name of God or Yahweh that would be invoked over people possessed of demons. He composed all kinds of incantations, and he left behind the manner of using exorcisms by which they drive away demons so that they never return. And listen to what Josephus says in verse 46. Or paragraph 46. And this method of cure is of great force even unto this day, meaning his time. So from Solomon's time all the way to the 1st century, and Josephus knows about this. Then he gives a specific example. It's kind of like Luke in the Gospels or a Gospel or the book of Acts. He will make a statement, then he'll give an example or two of that. That's just kind of standard Hellenistic history writing called historiography. And he says, I've seen a certain man of my own country, so he's going to give an example, whose name is Eleazar, releasing people who were demoniacs in the presence of Vespasian. Vespasian is going to be the next Roman emperor, y'all. He's the one who's the head of the Roman army sent to quell the first Jewish revolt of 66 to 70, or if you count out to Masada, 73 AD. And his sons and his captains and the whole multitude of his soldiers. So in front of the whole Roman army that's invaded the land of Israel, this guy's going to perform an exorcism. Are y'all ready for this? I don't want to scare you or surprise you. Are you ready for it? Okay. The manner of cure was this. He put a ring that had a root of one of those sorts mentioned by Solomon. Notice again, we're hearing about root, to the nostrils of demoniacs. After which, by means of which, he drew out the demon through the person who was possed's nostrils. And when the man, it must be kind of like a COVID test, y'all. When the man fell down immediately, he commanded him to return to him no more, and making the mention of Solomon. So again, Solomon's name is mentioned, kind of that name dropping. Do you remember in the book of Acts, in the name of this Jesus that Paul preaches, we command you to come out, those Jewish exorcists were saying. Didn't turn out so well for them, but they were trying. They were going by the, quote, book, if you will. And in reciting the incantations that he, meaning Solomon, had composed. When Eleazar would convince and demonstrate to the spectators that he had such a power, he set a little, pay close attention to this next little part, guys. He set a little way off a cup or a bowl full of water and commanded the demon, as he went out of the demon-possessed man, to overturn it, and thereby, this way, to let the spectators know that he had left the man. Okay? So then, let's think back to Mark chapter 5. How was Jesus functioning, or Jesus using the Sea of Galilee?
As the water.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, is he using that as a means to expel the demon? No. This is what's interesting. And I think that this is what manner of man is this, or amazing. We've never seen anything like this before. Jesus was using no modality, not a root, not a ring, not fish entrails, not the name of Solomon, not the harp or anything like that, mention of David or whatever, certain incantations, blah, blah, blah. Jesus says these two things: be quiet, come out, right? So, but the point is that this is the function of the pigs in the story. We've so tried to, went about trying to explain why it was that the pigs drowned and Jesus would allow that and all this other stuff. The whole point was they were the ones that stirred up the Sea of Galilee as a gigantic bowl of water that demonstrated to everybody the demons had come out of the guy. And so Jesus, in a certain way, is following precedent, but in a major way, in proving that the demonic presences were gone. In a major departure, he is using no modality, no means, no method. Why is that? Because his word is authority enough. No need to name drop. In the name of David, in the name of Yahweh, in the name of Solomon. No need to use modalities like the harp or the incantations or the root or the smoke or the fish entrails or whatever. Jesus is able to cast out demons with a word. This is what was blowing people away. We have here examples in the 1st century of people who were known to cast out demons, but not the way that Jesus, not with the power and authority that Jesus did it. So the presence of demonic spirits, was that new? This awareness? No. That these demonic spirits could inhabit human beings, was that new? No. Was it new that certain individuals had the ability to cast out those demons? No, that's not new either. So nobody's freaked out when people have demons cast out of them. What people are amazed and impressed by is the authority of Jesus' spoken word. And that, brothers and sisters, goes right back to this whole point about Jesus' authoritative teaching and what he said about himself. His word has authority. If it has the authority to cast out demons without any intermediary, name dropping or modality, then more than likely we need to listen to what this guy has to say. Does that make sense? I hope that coheres as an argument. All right, there are just a couple of more passages that I wanted to mention to you, and then I'm going to stop sharing. We can talk about this. This is from the Testament of Solomon. I just thought I would throw a couple up here as examples. It's all over the place in the Testament of Solomon. But I, Solomon, I entered the temple of God, and I prayed that the demon might be delivered into my hands, that I might gain authority over him. And this angel Michael gave me a little ring, had an engraved stone on it, and I could lock up all the demons of the earth. Just really interesting. I called the boy that was demon possessed, gave him the ring, or the boy that needed help. Throw this ring at the chest of the demon. Notice you don't have any of this kind of stuff in the life and ministry of Jesus. And then you tell him, in the name of God, King Solomon calls you to come out, right? Name dropping. Testament of Solomon. The liver and the gall of the fish. There it is again from the book of Tobit. In the rabbis, these guys believe in evil spirits. on the eve of Sabbath, the evil spirits were created, kind of like the last thing created. In another rabbinic text, you take roots, you burn them, and you summon with water. Notice with water there. The rabbis know about the stuff just like Josephus knows about it, whereupon the spirit will flee. You get, here's an example, Shimon ben Yochai, miracle working, charismatic Hasid from the Galilee. And he says he's in Rome, finds out that the emperor's daughter, the Caesar's daughter, is demon possessed. And so he says to the demon, the name, and he knows what his name is, Ben Tamalion Se, come out. It's exactly the same thing. If you want to call it a formula, it's the only thing that Jesus says. And so the demon came out and left the emperor's daughter, and she was cured. More rabbinic text about writing an amulet. It's necessary to know the name of the demon. Notice that and only in that Mark 5 text about, what is your name? That's the only time that Jesus ever asked it. He doesn't establish it as a standard practice. It's a one-off thing. It's one time in his whole ministry. All these other exorcisms never mentioned that he asked the name of the demon. Okay, again, another text talks about an amulet. And so I'm going to stop share and see what you guys think about this issue of modality versus no modality, and the uniqueness of Jesus being in the authority of his spoken word, as opposed to all these other things. See, the only one that happens to know that there are people around that are demon possessed, the people know before Jesus ever shows up that people are being possessed by devils. It's definitely not that there are devils, that they're possessing people. I think that this uniqueness has got to have something to do with the means, the manner by which. Thoughts, questions, comments, rebukes, funny jokes.
I have a question. Are there any texts that show that a person was unsuccessful at drawing out of a demon or an evil spirit, that we can see that, yes, these incantations or things worked at certain times, but then at other times they did not work?
Okay, the only ones that I know of are actually in the New Testament itself, not in the extra biblical. So you get, for example, the person that is brought to Jesus, and the people said your disciples couldn't cast these out. So these are Jewish people in the land of Israel, but they're not able to expel the demon. These are actually the apostles whose writings we call the New Testament. Then there are these 7 sons of a Jewish priest by the name of Sceva, S-C-E-V-A, in the book of Acts. And they are evidently unsuccessful because they're the ones that end up beat up, not the demon. Those are the only 2 texts that I'm aware of. There may be, Chava, I don't have all of this stuff memorized, I haven't run across any texts in 40 years that give other examples other than that example in the Gospels and that example in the book of Acts. I will say this, and you can take this for what it's worth, totally for what it's worth, because this is not Bible. This is my experience speaking. There are people who are legitimately and genuinely mentally ill, or people who are emotionally disturbed. They've undergone some kind of trauma or something. And if you are in a community, or you are the kind of believer, you believe that, that exorcism is still a reality and a possibility, you nevertheless have to be careful, because you can't cast out mental illness. You can't cast out PTSD. That stuff has to be loved and discipled and role modeled and encouraged and and supported and that kind of thing. But I've seen lots and lots of damage brought about by well-meaning and otherwise godly Christians who think that there's a demon behind every door or bush, and that we can just run in and barge in where angels fear to tread without doing some sort of damage. And I'll just tell you one real quick story. There was a young man when I was in the pastorate in Cincinnati, and he came to our church and he was totally destitute. You could tell that he had been dumpster diving. He was more or less at that point homeless. And so we helped him with food. We helped him with a fresh couple of sets of clothes, shoes, belt. I mean, the whole 9 yards. And then he said, I need to talk to someone who's a pastor here. I was the only one available, I suppose. So I drew the duty that day. And I remember that we were down in the basement of the church and we were in the kids area. And because I remember sitting on these really little short chairs, you know, where your legs get cramps, you know. And if you've been doing children's ministry lately and you're an older person, you know what I'm talking about. Little tiny chairs. So we're both sitting in these little chairs. And I called him by name because they told me what his name was. I said, what can I help you with today? And he said, I need you to cast the homosexual spirit of Stephen out of me. And I said, you mean Stephen in the Bible? He said, no, my roommate, Stephen. Anyway, he tells me this long story. And I'm not a social worker or a psychologist or anything like this. Sometimes as Christians, when we're tapped into the real source of all knowledge, he drops these little things into our minds, you know, like you could say something like, I felt led, or the Lord gave me an idea. That's what I'm talking about here. No stroke of lightning or anything like that. But these words just came out of my mouth. How long have you been off of your medication? And I went, what did I just say? Where did that come from? That was some Muppet that said that. I didn't say that. But he looked at me and he said, have you been talking to my mother? And I went, no, I don't know your mom. Remember, we just met. And he goes, oh, yeah. Well, how do you know that? How did you know that? And I went, I don't know. That's not a part of the conversation. Never mind. It's radar love or something. But, you know, God's reaching out to you. How long have you been off your medication? He said, for 3 weeks. I said, why did you go off your medication? Does your doctor know that you're off? He said, no, my doctor. And I said, so why did you go off your medication? He said, because whenever I take it, it makes me feel like I'm marching. And I went, you mean like in a band or in the army? He said, yes, it makes me feel like I said, look, I want you to do something for me. I've done something for you. We've helped you with food. We helped you with clothes. I want you to promise me that you will go back to your doctor and tell him I'm having problems with my medication. And your doctor will give you a different one, or maybe he's going to give you a different amount of that medicine or something like that. But this can be fixed. And he said, he looked at me and he said, you mean he can do that? I almost wept, y'all, because I was just one step away. I was one trigger pull away from going full bore on this guy. And some kind of way, the Lord was merciful enough to me to keep me and the damage I would have done to this poor guy who didn't need any more damage done to him, from taking a completely different approach to this than what needed to happen. So I'm thankful that God is greater than demonic presences, but I'm also thankful that God is still a God of the gift of knowledge or wisdom or whatever you need in the instance to keep from breaking something worse rather than fixing it. So, you know, don't get all fired up because we're studying exorcism tonight and go start casting demons out of cars and bushes and stuff. Or people who might just have the spirit of stupid, you know, in them, and not a demonic presence. Okay. I got to go back. We've got to finish up here, and we've got the one of the coolest ones left to go. So let's go to share screen again, and we're going to deal with miracles of resurrection. And we're going to do it in the same way that with the same purposes. When Jesus was raised from the dead, is this something like it just freaked everybody out because they'd never heard of that before, never happened before? This is a total one-off situation. It only happened to him. Well, I'll tell you this one thing, that when I was in seminary, they told me anything that is it a standalone, anything that resembles Jesus' resurrection, like people coming back to life in the Old Testament or other places in the New Testament or whatever, those are resuscitations. Those aren't real resurrections. And my response to that was, after I took a look at it, the Bible uses the same Greek words, same two Greek words of other people that are used of Jesus' resurrection. So I think that the distinction of the importance of Jesus' resurrection, no doubt, is totally at a different level than all of these other people. Just in terms of the Greek language used to communicate, divine revelation in the New Testament, there's no difference. So Mark chapter 5, Jesus says to the little girl, Talita Kumi, and then the girl gets up, comes back to life. Yeah, that's a resurrection. It's the same word, that's one of the two same words that are used of Jesus' resurrection. Another one in Luke chapter 7, he came up and touched the coffin of the widow who had only one son, and he says, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And here you have the Arabic village of Nin, N-I-N, that is preserving the toponym Nain or Nain that we hear about in Luke chapter 7. In John chapter 11, Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. Here's a picture of, this is the opening for the tomb that's about, 10, 12 feet underneath the surface of the ground here now. And it's been a while since I've been there because the wall has been built, the security fence. But in John 11, Jesus says, Lazarus, come forth, and then says, unbind him and let him go. Lazarus came back to life. Was there resurrection in the Hebrew Bible? Well, the writer of Hebrews says there was. When we look at specific examples, we have in the ministry of Elijah that he prays to the Lord, let this child's life return, and the life of the child returned to him, and he revived. In 2 Kings, we have Elijah's disciple Elisha. Same thing happens. The little boy says, or the son says, my head, and he has a heat stroke or something like that, and he died. And so then it says, and she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God and closed the door behind him and went out. So Elisha comes and he sees that the child is dead and on his bed. So look at this, verse 33. He entered and shut the door and prayed. These are the same three verbs that Jesus uses when he says, but when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites who love to pray on the street corners. You go and enter the inner room and pray to your Father who hears in secret, and in secret he will reward you. And it says you go in and shut the door and pray. It's the same three words. I think that that's probably a remez or a hint that Jesus uses, kind of a hypertexting that God is going to meet us in our hour of need, and he's going to answer our prayer in the same kind of powerful way that he did to Elijah and Elisha. James makes that very point about the ministry of Elijah. Elijah is a man of like nature as us, and yet when he prayed, God withheld rain and then sent rain. Okay, and so then you have he walked around, stretched himself on him. By the way, you get arrested for that today. The lad sneezed 7 times and the lad opened his eyes. So here's one of the things that's interesting about this. Here is Jesus the Jesus raising in Luke 7 of the young man, the only son of the widow of Nain, right here. And then this is the hill of Moreh at the eastern end of the Jezreel Valley. And then this is the area of Shunem right here on the exact opposite side from the hill of Moreh. So I think that there's this theme going on, especially in the Gospel of Luke, of Jesus going around replicating the miracles of Elijah and Elisha, these two great patron saint prophets of the northern kingdom, which is where he lives and has most of his ministry. Even after Elisha dies, they're burying a man and they throw his body in when the marauding band shows up into the grave of Elisha. And when the man touched the bones of Elisha, he revived and stood on his feet. That's resurrection in the Hebrew Bible. Then we have prophecy about a general resurrection that's going to take place. It's more than going to be more than just one person here or there. It's going to be your dead will live, the corpses will rise, you who lie in the dust awake, and the earth will give birth to the departed spirits. That's the Isaiah chapter 26. Now, this whole idea about this is all brand new, and this came in after Persian dualism was encountered in the exile, and it's intertestamental, and it's something that was unique to the Pharisees and all. Tell Isaiah that, and this is pre Babylonian exile, Isaiah 26. Ezekiel 37, also, Son of man, can these bones live? I will open your graves and cause you to come out of your graves, says God to Ezekiel. That's bodily resurrection. Daniel, one of the clearest examples, Daniel 12, many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake. So people in their Bible are being told this has happened before, and this is going to happen again in a more general kind of resurrection. When you get to the intertestamental period, yeah, you have it in the late 4th, early 3rd century BC from the book of First Enoch. The righteous and elect will have risen from the earth. They will be clothed with garments of glory. You hear that kind of language in the book of Revelation. You hear it 4Q. That means Qumran cave 4. And this is the messianic apocalypse, that the Messiah is going to bring the life back from the dead. In 2nd Maccabees, you get it. This is a kind of like 105 BC or something like that, intertestamental apocrypha. And the hope that God gives of being raised again by him, especially of the martyrs. Judah Maccabee acted very well and honorably, taking into account the resurrection. He called on the Lord of life and spirit to give them back his bodily members as he's being martyred back to him again. 4th Ezra, those in the earth will be restored, those that are asleep, and those that are in the dust that dwell in silent secret places that were committed to them, they're going to come back to life. Josephus says the Pharisees believe in the opportunity for resurrection. In the rabbis, the Shmoneh Esrei, prayed every day, has one of the invocations about the resurrection of the dead. So rabbis are already all over this. Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair says that saintliness leads to the gift of the Holy Spirit, and resurrection the Holy Spirit leads to resurrection of the dead, and the resurrection of the dead are going to come about through Elijah. There's that connection of, again, John the Baptist, Jesus, and then all of this resurrection ministry that we hear about. If you don't believe in resurrection of the dead, then you're going to bust hell wide open, according to the rabbis. I don't really have time to deal with the rest of this, but I did want to share just a couple of passages really quickly. I know we're out of time, and I'm not going to hold you over. If you need to run, put a baby to bed, please don't let me hold you. But do intertestamental and rabbinic sources have anything to say about the resurrection of Jesus? And at this time, Josephus says there was a wise man called Jesus. I should put that question to bed. Non-biblical source. Josephus never was a believer. And he says there was a man named Jesus. He was virtuous and good. Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die. This is all stuff that confirms the New Testament gospel Acts, etc. reports. Those who became his disciples didn't stop. They reported that he appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion and that he was alive. So there you have a Jewish source, first century, land of Israel, contemporary of the apostles, contemporary of the writing of the New Testament. And you've got that. This is not just something that somebody made up later on and put in the Gospels, like a Rudolf Bultmann kind of approach to Gospels, that there's nothing that we can know about the historical Jesus because the Gospels were written too late. Well, yeah, actually there is, because we've got a fifth example telling us how he died and who put him to death. And the rabbis, they crucified him on the eve of Passover. And I know those of you who study carefully Jewish backgrounds of the New Testament, you know that Jesus did not die on Passover. We in Christianity think that commonly, but the point is that the Passover sacrifice was offered the day before Passover. Then the sun set. Then it was, according to Jewish reckoning of time, the next day, the 14th of Nisan, and you and then you ate the Passover. You ate the Passover lamb, but it's already the next day. So the eve of Passover, Jesus was crucified. Gospels are super clear about that. Why? Because he practiced magic and he caused Israel to go astray. In other words, they're recognizing Jesus had a miraculous ministry. He did miracles. Remember in the Gospels, we know that you're casting out demons, but you're doing it by the power of Beelzebub, by the power of Satan himself. And Jesus says in his own inimitable way, that's just dumb. You know, a house divided against him itself cannot stand. Okay. Onkelos, according to the rabbis, went and raised Jesus the Nazarene from the grave through necromancy, being able to raise the departed spirits. This was his sin. He mocked the words of the sages. Okay. And one last text. Woe to him who makes himself alive by the name of God. Some kind of way the rabbis, and there are lots of other passages that deal with this, that he brought back from Egypt a cut, spells and a cut in his flesh, and was able to work miracles by the dark side of the force and that kind of thing. The rabbis taught in many different passages in rabbinic literature that Jesus was able to raise himself, or somebody like Onkelos raised him from the dead using inappropriate means. This, they understand, Jesus did come back to life, but he did it by the inappropriate use and the ability to pronounce the name of Yahweh. And so they're acknowledging in a backhand way, yes, Jesus was just like Josephus, was raised from the dead, but it was by inappropriate means and is therefore illegitimate itself. So yes, we do have reference to this most important event that we hear about in all four of the Gospels, about the resurrection of Jesus from the dead, both from Josephus and from the rabbis, which is totally fascinating to me. I said that I would put up a slide for you so that you get the spelling right if you want to go and get those 4 videos that we've done out of these 6 weeks that we've been together. And that's how you get to Facebook or to my YouTube channel. And that's where they will be housed for the next month. And I will stop share and wish you a good evening. If you want to hang around and talk, I'll be here. I'm going to do a little quick presentation on the Good Samaritan for the next half an hour, and then we can visit a little bit more broadly. But I am out of time. That's the end of my 6 weeks with y'all. God bless you. Be merciful to you. Thank you. Thank the Lord that you've survived me. And I appreciate each one of you and your heart for knowing Jesus in his original context. I want to encourage you to grab a hold of some of this stuff. Josephus, Philo, Dead Sea Scrolls. I mean, you can get a used Catholic Bible at a used bookstore somewhere close to your house, or you can get it on the internet, whatever, have it shipped. And you've got all of that intertestamental apocrypha there, not the weird post-New Testament stuff, but just jump in there and start, wailing away at it. Sepharia.org, you've got all of the early rabbis, most of it's in English now. Articles that are there on my website, articles that are online. All you got to do is like Google my name and You can get a bunch of the stuff that you've been reading. So I'm saying this to encourage you. There is stuff out there for you to continue this study, pressing the matter of knowing Jesus in his original context beyond this class. There's only so much we can do in 6 weeks, 6 meetings. So keep on keeping on. The Lord bless you and strengthen you, give you a powerful witness, continue to grow you, and that you might know him. Have a good night for all those that are going to leave now.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nawing. Thank you.
Blessings to each of you. All right, just real quick before we go off into Good Samaritan territory, is there a burning question or comment that somebody wants to make? Yes, Lynn.
I have a question. It's bugged me for years. Maybe you can help me. I actually have asked a lot of people, and I'm not sure about the answer. In John 11, where he comes and to resurrect Lazarus after he's been dead 3 days, and in John 11:24, Martha says, I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life, and he who believes in me shall and never dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? And she said, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of the God who come into the world. So there seems to be some kind of belief at that time that people did believe in a resurrection, whether it's bodily then or at the end of days. But what is it that they believed?
Okay, so it is, you're exactly right. It is all over the place. This whole idea, this sham that has been foisted on the world, and the church is part of the world, by secularists and more left-leaning scholarship and stuff, that this is a unique innovation of the Pharisaic party. And the whole idea of bodily resurrection only shows up in like the 2nd century BC, is complete baloney. It's in Isaiah 26, it's in Ezekiel 37, it's in Daniel chapter 12, and then it's in other places like First Enoch, that are way before, like a century and a half before the 2nd century BC. So the dating is all wrong, and the attribution of these scholars is wrong. The Pharisees simply picked up on what was already there in the Hebrew Bible, period. We've just read those passages. So as far as I'm concerned, end of story. They don't have a leg to stand on, because we have texts that directly contradict that assertion, that this is a 2nd century BC and onward phenomenon, this emphasis on bodily resurrection from the dead. The Hebrew Bible taught it. The Pharisees picked up on it, and they were teaching it too. Before there was ever a Pharisaic movement, there's already stuff in apocryphal and pseudepigraphical literature. It's in the Dead Sea, so it's the Dead Sea Scrolls talk about the resurrection of the dead. So it's not something unique to the Pharisaic party or movement. I'm not trying to take anything away from them. They were ardent proponents of it, and more than likely, the emphasis in early Christianity came more from them, I would argue, than from the Dead Sea community. Just as it just makes more sense. The Dead Sea community is too isolated, they're too secretive, and they have less influence on early Christian origins than do the rabbis / Pharisees. So, but it's all over the place, and it's all over the place because it's in the Hebrew Bible. The only people that won't accept it are the Sadducees, and presumably that's because you don't have bodily resurrection in the Torah, and they're only building their beliefs and practices on the basis of what is written in the law of Moses, or in the Torah of Moses. Anyway, it's there. So it's expected. There is this expectation arising out of the Hebrew Bible with this continuity of belief and argument all the way through the intertestamental period, all the way through the New Testament. The rabbis, it's all over the place. It's in Jewish belief and practice all the way until today, except in certain areas of maybe Reform Judaism. And so everybody believed it except the Sadducees. And they're a tiny fraction of the population of the land of Israel in the first century. They're like the upper crust, the elites, the aristocrats of the population. Nobody followed them anyway. They're kind of their own. They didn't want anybody following them. They wanted the poor people to leave them alone. Josephus is really clear on this too. I mean, all you got to do is get you a 1 volume of Josephus and then look up in the subject index, look up the word resurrection, and you will find it all over the place. And the primary proponent is not the Sadducees, but rather the Pharisees. He'll also describe the Essenes, who we think are the Qumranites, the people that created the Dead Sea Scrolls. And Josephus will say that they believed in, eternal life and life after death and stuff like that. In this 4Q521 text that talks about the Messiah, this is a Dead Sea text, a Qumran text or an Essenic text, is going to bring the dead back to life. So it's clearly there. It's obviously there at Qumran or among the Essenic community. Is that helping? Is that enough, Lynn, or you want to redirect me?
That's a start. It's just like, it was like a non-negotiable. It's like, yeah, well, of course everybody believes it. It was
Yes.
just like, and like today you'll hear Jews say, oh, we don't believe in the resurrection. And I'll say, well, what about the Shmoneh Esrei? Why is
There
the
you
most
go.
expensive real estate in the world on Mount of Olives? What would that be for? And so, I'll ask all these questions, and I've asked many, many rabbis, and the answers are varied, but they say, well, we don't have one set theology. We don't have a theology of resurrection. And I'll ask them about, well, what about Daniel? And what about these verses? And it's always sidestep, but this seems to me clearly that it was like, of course we believe in resurrection of the dead.
Absolutely. So there's a great reason, Lynn, why it is that we just did what we did, because we're almost as postmodern as any self-avowed postmodernist, and that is reality is limited to our experience of it. It's the here and now, and nothing ever happened before us and nothing will ever happen after us. We live in this bubble that we have created for ourselves. We're trapped in it. We can't get out of it. And the sad thing about it is, it doesn't matter how much we pep talk ourselves into thinking that, it's not true. There was a David. There was a George Washington. There was a yesterday. I had grandparents and great-grandparents, et cetera, et cetera. You might ask people who you get into that level of conversation with, what about Mishnah Sanhedrin chapter 10? And that text I put up there. These are those who have no share in the world to come. They don't get to go to heaven. Who is that? There's a bunch of different kinds of people, but one of the types of people that are excluded according to the rabbis' teaching. These are the guys who created normative Judaism. The rabbis say, those who say there is no resurrection. It's just right there in the text. And so your question could be, well, what about Ezekiel 37? What about Isaiah 26? What about Daniel 12? And what about Mishnah Sanhedrin chapter 10? Just another bullet in your arsenal, if you will. Anybody else got something?
Thank you so much for your teaching. I love
You're welcome, Grace.
your COVID comment. We were rolling on the I mean, it was awesome. I love this, in context. I've been doing a lot of studying on dream culture, and it's really fascinating because it's so parallel to what you're talking about. That they understood that God spoke to them in dreams, and that it was expected and normative, and it's like once I opened up to that, it actually made it easier for me to see the other normative things of the culture. And so I'm so thankful for your teaching on this. You're being so clear. I would say the biggest revelation for me is all of the context that you're giving in all these different writings. It's really, really blessing me to see you present so much material like that.
Well, I'm super grateful for that, because I'm thankful that God in his, providence saw fit to preserve so much stuff. When I first came to the Lord in 1974, I thought, well, it's a good thing we've got these 66 books in the Bible. Nothing else ever survived ancient times, antiquity. I was an idiot, nothing could be further from the truth. And the more that we excavate, the more ancient text on pieces of pottery and written on stone and that sort of thing are coming to light. And it's just, it's fascinating to me to realize now, from where I sit on the opposite end of life from where I was when I was 19 or whatever, and to realize that we've got so much stuff to access that I'll never work through it all. And yet all of it is helpful for us to decontextualize, disconnect from the world of, white Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, English-speaking 21st century Western, Christianity, and get back into a time that doesn't exist anymore. I just love the whole idea of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and the magic phone booth and being able to go back in time, and we can do that in a legitimate way, in a way that has academic scholarly legitimacy, because we're basing our historical reconstructions not on some kind of flight of fancy that is in my head, but stuff that I've been able to show to you in, as it were, black and white. It's evidence. It's not some kind of once upon a time they all lived happily ever after. I really despise the way that we are treated by so many leaders in the Christian world, that just their attitude, they never have to cite a source. Even if it's a modern scholarship, it's like, oh yeah, well, I came up with that idea myself. And people don't cite it. It's all coming from Radar Love. They're getting these ideas, and they don't have to, well, back in Jesus' day, the rabbis used to teach. Really, who said so? Show me a text. I'm not a doubting Thomas or anything like that. I want to see the evidence. I want to play the game. I want to be let in on the fun stuff. So let me into your laboratory. Let me into your study. Let me see those texts that it is that you're seeing. And then I'm going to be so cool to go with that. And it might even encourage me to do some more study on my own. Imagine that.
Well, we're coming out of a period of centuries of, like, the Catholics hid. I mean, let's just put in Latin, and only our picked people are going to know information. And then, by the way, we're going to be changing it as we want. They were doing the same things that we saw happening in the 2nd and 3rd century. To me,
I've been saying for about 15, somewhere between 15 and 20 years, that the clock is turning backward and the Protestant church is going back to a pre-reformational version of the church in so many ways. And one of the ways we push back against that is to take ownership of this business of our own spiritual maturity, learning the proper methods of Bible interpretation. Ask, what did the original writer mean? What was the original context? How did the original audience would have understood that? And being able to feed ourselves, and then being able to get equipped so that we function as the priests. We are all a royal priesthood, a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, and not just some select group of special people that have certain kinds of credentials or whatever, but we are all called to be that. I mean, this goes back to Exodus 19, where God said to Moses, "You are unto me a kingdom of priests." That's where the idea of the priesthood of all believers didn't come in 2 Peter, or rather 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9. It was at Mount Sinai. This has always been God's attitude and heart toward us. He wants us all fully functioning.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up question on that. So, given all of the extra biblical resources that are available now, why do we never hear about it in, churches or different things? Is this not something that's been filtered down to seminaries? Or I'm just surprised because it's, I never hear anything about this, and only through research of my own have I discovered, Hebrew and different things like that. And it just like blows the Bible and understanding completely in a new way.
Yeah.
So is there just because it's not, God breathed, they don't think it's applicable, or what is the hang up there?
Well, my response to that, I hear that all the time, is why are you quoting in a Christian pulpit? Why are you quoting the Mishnah? Or why are you quoting First Maccabees? Or whatever I'm happening to be working with. And my response is, why do you get so excited about archaeological discoveries? Whoops, okay. Heaven forbid that we should think carefully, right? Or with linear logic. But the reality is all of this stuff is just ancient evidence. I'm not trying to, I hope that you guys noticed, I didn't suggest that we tweak any doctrine, any major, matter of ethics or morality, or, Jesus is still God. The scripture's still inspired. It's still salvation by his blood only. None of that stuff is we've been playing a little bit around the edges, and we've been trying to understand Jesus in his original context. We're painting background and more brighter and more detailed fashion, so that we understand Jesus in his times better. I really don't understand what the problem is with that. I can tell you this, that at whether it's undergraduate or all the way, whether it's freshman all the way up to PhD, I told you about the PhD course that I've been working with, right? And everything in between, nobody really deals with this here except me. I'm not saying that I'm cool or special or anything. I'm just stating the obvious. There's nobody else that deals with this material. I'm going to tell you a story, super quick, 30 seconds. I made a presentation in chapel on what we can know about Jesus from evidence outside the Bible that directly talk about Jesus. Jewish sources, Greek sources, Latin sources, the rabbis, and then we always, on Tuesdays, we have lunch as a Department of Biblical Studies. And there was about 15 people sitting around the table, different disciplines, PhD, great, Harvard, Emory, Marquette, Harvard, and PhDs from all these different areas, Old Testament, New Testament, Greek, early church history, blah, blah, blah. And I said, which of those texts did you guys know about? About 3 of them said, I knew that one text from Josephus, Antiquities 18, book 18. None of the rest of the thing. It's like 20 something passages from ancient literature and archaeology and stuff like that. The rest of the people, other than those 3, then hadn't even heard of the one passage in Josephus. So I don't know. It's a somewhat of a stigma that has developed over the centuries. I'm not going to read that stuff because that's those Catholic books. Yeah, like the Dead Sea Scrolls are Catholic, right? Even the intertestamental Apocrypha has nothing to do with Catholicism. There were no Christians, much less Catholics, around in the days when First Maccabees or Ben Sira, Ecclesiasticus, or Tobit was written. We're talking 3 centuries, 4 centuries into the, if you talk all the way out to the Roman Catholic Church, a half of a millennium later. It's just a weird ideas. I don't know if most people, it blows their mind when I say, did you know that both Luther and Calvin encouraged their followers to read the Apocrypha? It's in their writings. They said it in black and white. No, I never read anything like that. Well, it doesn't mean it's not there. Check it out.
Yeah.
Check it out.
That's what made him radical. And God, it's like the veil was rent, but the veil is lifting off of us. We were under the influence of, and even like you said, the Protestant, there's a continuing reformation that needs to be made and brought out, and it's through this education process. And you are one of the very few, and I listened to quite a few different people, that teach similar to you, that there's so few and they get so much pushback. I deal with people that they won't even read a Bible that doesn't have King James Version printed on the outside of it, and I'm like, okay, I can't even talk with you because, you don't even understand where that came from.
I wonder sometimes about the certain people in the church. For example, I was teaching a Sunday school class at a church one time, and a guy said, "Why are you reading from the Old Testament? This is a Christian church." And I went, "You're kidding, right?" That was sort of a backhanded joke. I mean, because I don't know, I picked this book up this morning and it's called the Bible, and I opened it up and all of a sudden it's the book of Leviticus. It's still in there. So I don't know. Pardon me for thinking. I just assumed it's still part of the Bible.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been shocking how, well, one, I think we don't know the scriptures well at all as a general church population, but especially so with the Hebrew Bible. It's absolutely appalling how little, because it's never been focused on. And so people they come to it with this attitude of like, oh yeah, well, those are just like children's stories, but that's the extent of my need to know of the Old Testament. And so changing that mindset is a challenge, but then adding these other texts that support the truths and give context, give history, to me, it adds such a richness to our understanding of Jesus. Like, if you want to know Jesus, you have to know the Hebrew scriptures.
Would you guys agree with me that the writer of Hebrews assumes that we understand the sacrificial system and the way that the tabernacle, the Mishkan, functioned in the Hebrew Bible?
Yeah.
The answer is yeah. That's an assumption. And so if he makes that assumption and then we don't know, okay, so for example, we don't study the sacrificial system as Christians because Jesus fulfilled the sacrificial system. It's a bumper sticker thing that we do. We don't need to study the calendar, the sacred calendar of Judaism, because, well, Jesus fulfilled all the feasts, so we don't need to study that because he's fulfilled all of that. We come up with these blanket kind of broad brush statements when in reality, we're shutting ourselves off from the very deeper understanding of our own, the 27 New Testament books, Book of Hebrews as an example, by that kind of attitude toward. So that sort of attitude produces this. This last week, it was not this week, but last week, I got an email from a former student of mine, PhD. I can't say it's very prestigious university where he teaches, and he teaches Bible. So he writes me and he says, "Dr. Wave," he said, "this has been bothering me for a long time, and I just wanted to know if you knew anything about it. You know, when it says in the Gospel of Luke that Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, he went into the temple and he burned incense because the lot fell to him to burn incense. that how did he do that? Because he wasn't the high priest, and only the high priest can go into the Holy of Holies, and the altar of incense is in the Holy of Holies. And he said, that's always bothered me. This guy's, is like 40 years old or something like that. Prestigious Christian university, teaching in the Bible department. Y'all not going to tell anybody I told you this, are you? All right. And so I wrote to him and I said, in the book of Exodus, it says this. In the book of Numbers, it says this. In the book of Leviticus, and we just went back into the sacrificial system. And it's so obvious that you got in one place in the Torah, it says that there were priests that had 250 censers. It's in the rebellion of Korah, right? And all of that. In Numbers 16 and around in there. 250 different priests. Never mind the high priest, 250 different priests who had censers that had incense burning on the inside of it. So what's going on? Yes, the high priest does go into the Holy of Holies. He's the only one, and only on Yom Kippur, and then he burns incense in there. That's true, but that's not the only place. There are meal offerings, and there are meat offerings that require that incense be offered along with it. So I wrote him back and he goes, this is what the guy said. Yes, well, I just assumed that they took incense and they rubbed it into the meat, kind of like what we would do with a rub. Come on, ladies, help me here. It's sort of a baste, almost.
Marinade.
Yeah, almost, yeah. And
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
going, so then what's the purpose of the censer? And he goes, oh yeah, I guess I did know that there was incense that was being offered on the altar of burnt offering outside of the Holy of Holies, and that any priest could participate in. Then you get these stories, for example, in Tractate Yoma, the Day of Atonement, in the Mishnah. In chapter 1, it talks about how there were so many priests, they were all run to the altar, and the first person there would get to do whatever they wanted to do, like burn incense or to take the ashes off. And then somebody broke his leg when they were running. And so from that point on, they decided to do this by the casting of lots. That's what Luke is talking about. It's explained in Mishnah Yoma, Tractate Yoma, chapter 1. It's right there in rabbinic literature. It's right there in the Mishnah. And so then he goes, oh, okay, well, I guess I just didn't know that text. Maybe he didn't take that class with me or something. I don't know. But anyway, I just thought that was really weird, but it just serves to point out what you were saying, Grace's daughter, whoever, that we're not teaching our professors, we're not requiring that this stuff be studied and understood, and people learn their way around in it and start learning how to use it properly and that kind of thing. And so then it's left largely to the weirdos to do stuff. And if I fall in that camp, then so be it. But I don't think so, because I really try to keep my methodology pure and my treatment of the sources pure, and then my conclusions based on the evidence, not on speculation or my personal opinion or how I feel, or just I got something by radar love, but I try to stick with the evidence. And so that you're right, there are not that many folks, but I hope that you have seen the value of studying that. Question for you. Would it be okay if we went to Luke chapter 10 now and did Good Samaritan? So people that have been waiting for that, go ahead and get them off to bed.
Yes, thank you so much.
Oh, you're totally welcome. I'm happy to help in any way that I can. All right, so we're going to do parable of the Good Samaritan as an example of Jesus' parable telling ministry. I want you to understand first the purpose of parable. The purpose of parable as used by the rabbis, and we have more than 2,000 preserved parables by rabbis, the leaders of the Pharisaic movement, more than 2,000 of them. We only have 42, or maybe depending on what you count as being a parable, up to around 70, the low 70s. So somewhere between the low 40s and low 70s of parables that Jesus uses in his teaching, depending on who it is that's doing the counting and what their criteria for including a passage as a parable or not. So we've got less than 100, put it that way, maybe somewhere around 50 or so parables that Jesus taught, but we've got over 2,000. Do you suppose some of these parables go back to the 1st century and before? You suppose it would be important to compare, like we've been doing with Jesus' healing ministry or his exorcism ministry or his resurrection or his nature miracles or whatever? Do you think it would be a legitimate inquiry to compare what Jesus does with how Jesus uses parable with what's going on with parable more generally in the culture that he's a part of? And the answer to that is absolutely. Of necessity, you would need to do that. So Brad Young, Rod, that's one of your mentors. Brad Young has a book on Jesus parables. David Stern has a book on Jewish parables. The best one that's come out recently, but it's the most expensive too, is by two guys, Zev Safrai, that's Shmuel Safrai's son, Zev Safrai, and Steve Nunnally. And it concords almost all of those early parables and discusses them in light of Jesus' use of parable in the New Testament. So parable is a well-known literary form in the 1st century by the time Jesus shows up. It's been used by the Pharisees for decades and decades, probably hundreds of years. So when he starts telling parables, again, he fits right into his culture because people are used to hearing parable. In what context? The context of parable is when a sage, a religious teacher, is trying to illustrate some Bible passage or some spiritual reality. And then what he does to make it concrete and make it approachable or accessible by everybody in the audience, irrespective of age, irrespective of how much Bible they know or how much general education they have or what their craft is or even how literate they are, that everybody can get on board with this because it makes a spiritual, maybe an unseen reality, very concrete, very tangible, very observable, very touchable, reachable, accessible to the average person. So when you're trying to speak to the common people, whether you're some other rabbinic sage or you're Jesus, you're going to use parable, just as a matter of course, because that's the point, is to illustrate a spiritual reality with an earthly reality. And it can't be something that's unusual, weird. We use the word esoteric, but it's got to be everyday, commonplace. So it's a snapshot of everyday life that's then applied to the to an ancient text or a spiritual reality to illustrate. Its purpose is illustrative. Okay, so parable of the Good Samaritan. All of that said, here's a couple of other things. There are parables are only told by sages in the land of Israel. Babylonian rabbis do not tell parables. They will recite parables, but it's always a parable that pre-exists in a Hebrew form that comes from the land of Israel. So parables only come to us from the land of Israel, from a rabbinic or Pharisaic sage, and only in the Hebrew language. Even in the Babylonian Talmud, which is mostly Aramaic, if you count the number of words, it's more Aramaic than it is Hebrew. In the Babylonian Talmud, when they quote a parable, they quote it in Hebrew. Then they go back to Aramaic to interpret and apply the parable to whatever discussion is being had at the time that the parable is invoked. Does that make sense? Everybody understand where we're going with? Hopefully you now have a good perspective of the big picture of parable. So now you understand how parable is going to work in this parable of the Good Samaritan. Okay, so this is the way it starts off. It starts off with a discussion, and the discussion starts off with a question. That's standard rabbi stuff. We're talking about Jews, land of Israel, first century rabbi world. A certain lawyer stood up and put him, and this is not a lawyer that tries cases in front of a court. This is an expert in the law of Moses. Puts him to the test saying, teacher, what do I do to inherit eternal life? So that's what's on the table here. Jesus says, what's written in Torah? How do you read it? He answered and said, that's standard for Old Testament, answered and said. So the way that people are talking in the Gospels is the same way that people are talking in the Old Testament. That's a great reason, Grace's daughter or friend, to read the Old Testament, is because so much of the stock language and stuff that we read about in the New Testament, like answered and said, that's a phrase that comes straight out of the Hebrew Bible. It's not made up in the New Testament. They don't talk like this in Greek literature. This is Hebrew right here, and it's biblical. It's coming out of the Bible. So he answered and said, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, strength, and all of your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Now I put this in brackets because it's borrowed from the previous verse. Why do you suppose that this guy, it's in the original Hebrew, it's in the Old Testament, but he doesn't say that. I put that in brackets, showing that this grammatical unit is borrowed from, when he's quoting Leviticus 19:18, he's borrowing it from Deuteronomy 6. He's borrowing the verb. He's clicking and dragging it down here, and it's saying, and it applies to this as well. And you love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, so the verb is borrowed. That's telling you that somebody's doing something interpretively already. This, and love the Lord your God. And I put it here in Hebrew, not so much because everybody knows Hebrew, but I want you to take a mental picture of what I'm circling with my cursor right now. Ve'ahavta, and you shall love. Okay, I've written it down here in English transliteration. This is coming to us from Deuteronomy 6:5. Okay, ve'ahavta, and you shall love et Adonai Elohecha, your God. And this is the part that he kind of borrows from Deuteronomy 6. He doesn't even bother saying this part because he's already said it down here. And ve'ahavta, same phrase. I want you to notice this. Here's Deuteronomy 6:5. Here's Leviticus 19:18. So for non-Hebrew readers, does it look the same, the stuff in yellow? Answer is yes, it's word for word, letter for letter. It's exactly the same. Even the same vowels underneath and the same accent marks. It's exactly the same. That's the reason why this guy is able to connect these two verses, because it has common language. It shares the same verb, ve'ahavta, ve'ahavta. Okay? Jesus answered and said to him, and Jesus said to him, you have answered correctly. Do this and you will live. This is Jesus saying, you do those two, you're gonna end up with eternal life, whether you like it or not. But wishing to justify himself, he said to Jesus, and who is my neighbor? So he's going back, he's circling back to that Leviticus 19:18, and he's going, no, Jesus, drosh this for me just a little bit. Give me some midrash on this. Give me some Bible interpretation. Define for me very clearly, very carefully, neatly, who's to be classified as re'echa, your neighbor. Because there are certain people that I don't really want, categorized as neighbor. Jesus replied or answered and said, this is when he tells the parable. I want you to notice, you've got Deuteronomy 6:5, you've got Leviticus 19:18, and now you have the parable. The parable then is going to illustrate. He's asked him, tell me who neighbor is. Well, he's probably expecting Jesus to quote him a verse. That's the way you play in the world of first century Judaism. Give me a Bible verse that defines for me, or that gives the answer to the question I just asked. Who is neighbor? Jesus instead does another thing. Instead of quoting a Bible verse, he tells a parable. Totally okay. absolutely acceptable, because now he's going to illustrate for him. Instead of quoting an authoritative Torah verse, he's going to tell a parable that will illustrate. Here's an example of how you can know who neighbor is and who neighbor is not. Okay. He says, a certain man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, stripped him, beat him, left him half dead. All right. Now, first mistake that we have made most of the time in Christian pulpits is we try to give an excuse to the people coming down, the priest and then the Levite, by saying, well, you see, they were going to the temple and they couldn't touch the guy because he may be already dead, or maybe just about half dead. He might be about to die. Princess Bride, he's only partly dead, right? Then that would render me ritually impure, and I can't do that because, I'm on the way to church. I've got to work at the temple, and I can't go in if I'm ritually impure. Jesus constructs this parable in a way that takes that excuse away from the priest and the Levite. And what have we done? We put it right back in. He took it away the way he constructs the parable. He says he's going down from Jerusalem. In other words, they'd finished work. They were going back to their priestly enclave that we know existed in Jericho. How do we know that? Because of our friend Josephus tells us that there was a group of priests that lived in Jericho, and they commuted back and forth up and down the Jerusalem-Jericho road to go to and from work. So he's going down. That means you're descending some almost 4,000 feet in about 16 miles from Jerusalem to Jericho. Josephus tells us about these robbers, these kleptoi, where we get our word kleptomaniac, that this area was full of these robbers in the first century, this area of the Judean wilderness. So we're getting a very accurate, people know these dynamics, they know these realities. And so this parable that Jesus is telling is, yeah, we know about priests. We know that they live, a bunch of them live down in Jericho. Yeah, we know that they go up and down the Jerusalem-Jericho road. Yeah, we know about the robbers and the danger of security and stuff like that. What's going to happen? Jesus is going to then continue this. Yeah, we know this is a stock parable. Yeah, we know about priests and we know about Levite. And these guys are really not that great. We don't cheer for them. The next guy that comes along, well, he's going to, it's going to be a rabbi. It's going to be a Pharisee. And so Jesus' parable is going to have a surprise ending. Get ready for that when it comes. By chance, a certain priest was going down on that road. So we didn't miss it once, we missed it twice. When we say, see, these guys are going to work, so they can't risk being made ritually impure. No, they're leaving work. They're not going to work. That's the reason why it's important. These kinds of hints in the text that assume that you know the topography, that Jerusalem is way up, Jericho is down below sea level, like 800 and something feet below sea level. So you're going down to the tune of about 4,000 feet in 16 miles. So he was going down that road. And when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Okay, so now we have to take a look at the land of Israel. And so we're in Jerusalem. This is where the temple is. This is where the priest and the Levite were. And they're going from Jerusalem down through the Judean wilderness. This is the Jerusalem-Jericho road. And you end up at this oasis right here, the little green circle, and that's Jericho. Lots of people living here, lots of people living down here, big new Herodian city there in the oasis of Jericho, but nobody down living through here. So there's no sheriff in town, nobody to police this road, and bandits are just having their way, as Josephus says in his Antiquities, Book 20. Okay, here's Jerusalem, and I want to take a look, get us some looks at this Judean wilderness. So here's the wall of the Turks Ottoman Turks from 1535, around that time, goes around the city of Jerusalem. Here's the Temple Mount right here, Dome of the Rock right in the middle, Mosque of Al-Aqsa. This is the Kidron Valley in the shadow there. Down here is the city of David in this shadow part right there. All of this long ridge going from north to south, this is the Mount of Olives. all of this. Behind the Mount of Olives, the Mount of Olives is higher than the city of Jerusalem, and the Mount of Olives becomes a sort of a watershed, and there's a rain shadow behind the Mount of Olives and all the way to the Jordan Valley down here. Some of you can see a little blue strip. That's the Dead Sea right there. This wilderness is the area that this parable's setting is incorporating into the story. It's a wilderness, Judean wilderness kind of setting. All right, here's another picture of the same, just to give you a better idea. This is a part of the old Jerusalem-Jericho road right here. Jerusalem is up at the horizon. That's at least the Mount of Olives is. The Mount of Olives is like right there. The backside of it. We're looking at it from the other side from the previous picture. Okay, here's Wadi Kilt, and the Jerusalem-Jericho road paralleled on the southern side of Wadi Kilt, this deep erosion area. So this is the runoff water from the hill country comes cascading down through the wilderness because there's very little plant life to absorb with roots and stuff to protect from erosion. And so you get these very deep canyons that we call wadis in Arabic or nahal in Hebrew. Okay, here's another picture. This is also Wadi Kilt. We're looking toward Jericho. There's Jericho down in the Jordan Valley. All of this right out here is the Jordan Valley, beginning here and going this way. This is the Transjordan. This is the kingdom, the modern day kingdom of Jordan today under King Abdullah II. His dad was King Hussein, who passed away. All right, back to the text. Likewise, a Levite. Okay, so priest, now Levite. He's working at the temple too. But the word likewise means in the same way. So in the same way that the man that went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and also the priest went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, so also the Levite. That's the reason for the word likewise. So they're all going in this with the same line of travel. They're all going from up to down, from Jerusalem to Jericho. Nobody here is going from Jericho to Jerusalem. The text tells us that 3 times. Likewise, or in like manner, in the same way. So when he comes to a place, he passes by on the other side. Now it's time for the rabbi to come along. But instead, in a surprise ending, this is what Jesus is, one of the things that he is great at, is these kind of gotcha moments that keep everybody in the audience on the edge of their seat or the edge of their rock or whatever, is Jesus injects, instead of the standard stock hero of the story, the most unlikely hero of the story, which would be somebody that in the New Testament, you know that Jews and Samaritans are not happy with each other. They can't stand each other. They don't want to be around one another. They don't want to have a whole lot of interaction unless it's just absolutely necessary for business or whatever. So a certain Samaritan who was on a journey came upon him. And when he saw him, he felt compassion. And he bandaged up his wounds, and he, put him on his beast, and he brought him to an inn. And he gave money to the innkeeper, said, take care of this guy. I'll pay you more if I need to later. And then Jesus asked the question, which of these 3, that's the priest, the Levite, and the Samaritan, proved to be neighbor to the man who fell into the robber's hands? This guy wants with all of his heart to be able to go back and rewrite the parable, but Jesus has already told it. What he wanted the parable to say, and then a rabbi came along and he would say, the rabbi, he's the hero of the story, and he proved to be, isn't he such a great role model, y'all? Isn't he? And yes, it's us 4 and no more. It's me and people who look like me and talk like me and act like me and practice my faith like me, and I submit to the rule of the rabbis and all of that other stuff. Yes, it's us 4 and no more, and I'm real comfortable with that. Thank you, Jesus. Now I know who neighbor is. And he goes on his merry way, but he's not enlightened. Jesus is not going to allow that. Have you ever heard that the responsibility of the pastor or the prophet of the Bible or whatever is to to comfort the afflicted, but also to afflict the comfortable. Jesus does this in such a masterful way. He's stretching this guy beyond his comfort zone, and he's requiring that this guy come to realize that, at least in Jesus' version of the story, the guy who was the hero that came in riding on the white horse with the white hat that saved the day was none less than one of his hated northern neighbors that he preferred not to have anything to do with. He said, which one of them proved to be neighbor? And he said, the one who showed mercy toward him. Look, he wouldn't even say the word Samaritan. The one who showed mercy. He's only going to refer to him in the third person. And Jesus said to him, then you go and do the same. In other words, you be neighbor back to this kind of guy in the same way this kind of guy was putting on a clinic, being neighbor to one of y'all. And in so doing, Jesus has introduced the third of only 3 of these Hebrew verbs. Remember, I asked you to take a picture in your mind of this. It's the same thing all the way down. Ve'ahavta, ve'ahavta, ve'ahavta. There are 3 of these in the entire Hebrew Bible. You've got your references written down here. You can write them down if you like, and you can go and look at them, and you go, but wait a minute, look at that. This third one, and you shall ve'ahavta lo hager kamocha, and you'll love the foreigner like yourself. That's not even 20 verses down the page from the last passage that the guy quoted, love your neighbor as yourself. And then he said, yeah, but who is my neighbor? Well, what Jesus has just done, he's told you who the ger is. The ger is this next door neighbor. It's your Samaritan friend that lives just a few miles maybe from you, just over the line in Samaritan town from Jerusalem. And it's in the same book, in the same passage, that this beautiful love your neighbor as yourself text. But then when the guy starts drilling down and says, yeah, no, but I really need you to very narrowly define for me. So, lower the bar so that I can crawl over it and get into heaven. And Jesus says, yeah, well, you just quoted the first 2 ve'ahavtas. Let me tell you a parable. Instead of quoting this to you and just making it, so obvious, let me make you stretch a little bit. I'm going to tell you a parable that illustrates this third ve'ahavta. And you shall love the stranger. You shall do love to the stranger like yourself. That is Jesus' parable of the Good Samaritan. The stranger that resides with you will be like the native among you. Love him like you love yourself, because you were aliens in the land of, you were Gerim, you were the Ger in the land of Egypt. I am Yahweh your God. In other words, God is signing off on this in Leviticus 19:34. He's saying, I'm signing my name to this. I'm really that serious about this. I am your God, and I am the one who delivered you out of Egypt, and you better forever remember that you got maltreated. Don't you ever, as my representatives, as the redeemed of the Lord, go back and treat other people that might be a little bit different from you in a way other than you would want to be treated yourself, the way that I treated you. Jesus taught this parable, and it was so impactful that he had to circle back around in Matthew 25. And he says, as you did it to the least of these, or didn't do it to the least of these, you do it to me. Jesus' followers complain about how we bless God, but then we curse men created in his image. Or how can you say that I love God, but you hate your brother? That person's a liar. How can you say that? The one that doesn't love his brother whom he hasn't seen can't love God. Who he has seen can't love God whom he has seen. This is the commandment that we have from him. The one who loves God should love his brother also. This was such an impactful teaching that Jesus gave. And then he backed it up by the way he lived. And then he circled back around and he gave it to them kind of on the eve of his death in Matthew 25, that it just got down into the DNA of early Christianity. And it's one of the reasons that these people went all over the world, the known world of their time, and they turned the whole world upside down. Here's my argument, is that if we get back to that same ethos, empowered by that same spirit, and then we obey that same Jesus, then maybe we could have a powerful impact on our world as well. Because it's not because God doesn't want to that our world isn't being reached. He wants to do what he's always done, and that's reach his world through his people. So this is one way to recognize the challenge that Jesus put out on the table 21 centuries ago. And it's still a challenge to us today if we'll live into it. Just remember the three ve'ahavtas of the Bible: Deuteronomy 6:5, Leviticus 19:18, and then just a few verses later, he clarifies who that re'echa, your neighbor, is in verse 34. Same book, same chapter. And by the way, yeah, it amazes me that there are so many people that, oh, well, the book of Leviticus isn't relevant. We don't have a priesthood. We don't have an altar. We don't do sacrifices. We don't have a temple anymore. And my response is, yeah, no, you are the temple and you are the priesthood. And by the way, yeah, you are the sacrifice too. All right, I'm going to stop share. And if you like, we can talk for a few minutes before we all go to bed or pass out.
That was absolutely fabulous. Thank you.
Is that not amazing? That's been there for 21 centuries. You know what I get from seminarians? Well, yeah, I know, but I'm going to take Greek. I don't want to take Hebrew. Everybody says it's too hard. Well, that's a great excuse. How about, well, you know what? I don't think I'm going to save up and buy a car because that's just too hard. I guess I'll just walk to work every day. That getting up at 7 o'clock in the morning to clock in at 8, that's just too hard. So I'm just going to check out. I guess I'll starve, or my kids will go shoeless or whatever. Since when was that ever an excuse? It's just too hard. When was that excuse for anything? Do you know who my best students are? Asians. I'm serious, Asians. Why is that? Because they still believe in working hard. They don't have any problem with working hard. It's us fat, complacent Americans that are struggling with this. I couldn't learn Hebrew. Couldn't learn that chicken scratch. It's like, you mean our alphabet's not chicken scratch? All it is symbols on a piece of paper. For the love. Okay, I'm dominating. Talk.
Hi, Dr. Nunnally. This is Saraswati from India.
Hello.
And what you just shared was really amazing, because coming from India, especially the south of India, and we're all minorities. Like being Christian is like being a minority, and having such diverse languages, and each state has different languages and things like that. We're always in this place of challenging our neighbor, to reach out the gospel and things like that. And what you just shared was so good, because I come from a big line of Hindus. I'm the only Christian in my house, and it's just so difficult to even share the gospel with my own family. Especially in this way of, showing it out of love. Mm-hmm. So what you shared about, love your neighbor in this perspective of, even if it's a stranger, it does not mean the person has to be a Jew or whatever background, makes a lot of sense, especially for a person living in my context, who has to face this almost on a day-to-day basis. It's hard for us to even go out and tell the world that we are Christians, because we are then shot down by it,
Yes.
Especially when you come from a converted background. So thank you so much for all that you shared. And I just have a question that I've been meaning to ask you, if I may. So it's basically from the book of Luke, chapter 8. And we were talking about the miracles of Jesus and how Jesus is also teaching us certain things, right? I just wanted to understand, why does he actually say, who touched me? Or, says someone deliberately touched me, especially in the story of the woman with the issue of blood being healed by just touching the hem of his garment.
Okay.
Was it a way of him teaching us a certain method, or was he just pretending? Was he being intentional? What's behind this story?
I think that Jesus saw that as an opportunity to point out that something miraculous had happened because he knew it. In the Luke version, different than all of the other gospels. What verse are you in chapter 8?
Chapter 8, verses 45, 46.
Yes, okay. In verse 46, Jesus knew it. He knew that someone had touched him, and he knew that something supernatural had happened, because he said, someone did touch me because I was aware that power went forth from me. So I think he wanted to take that as a window of opportunity to point out that God had indeed miraculously intervened in this person's life, and then to use her as an object lesson, in a sense. He says, daughter, verse 48, go, daughter, your faith has made you well, go in peace. Really it's even more beautiful in Hebrew, but that's another issue. Go in peace, your faith has made you well. People then recognize that he is a source of healing. So what happens? Right after that, someone else requests healing, right? Starting in verse 49, and all the way through verse 55. And the result is this cascading of miracles. The people were amazed. People were amazed. And so God is glorified. He didn't want to miss that opportunity. That person would have walked off healed, regardless of whether he had stopped the parade or not. But I think that he wanted people to wake up, to take notice that God had miraculously intervened, and for it then to evoke faith in others, and that as a result, other people would reach out for miracle and they would receive miracle.
May I add to that?
Yes, please.
The other piece is she's ritualistically impure for 12 years. So by her keeping her anonymity, Jesus is calling her out, making public her wellness. Now this issue of blood for 12 years, she's now pure. Now she can have a husband. Now she's not the laughing stock of the neighborhood. Now she can take her dirty rags down off the clothesline and not be the talk of the town of that woman who is unclean.
She can do business. She can go to the synagogue. She can touch a priest. She can touch a rabbi. She just did.
Right.
She can sit at the same table with her own family and enjoy a Shabbat dinner or celebrate the Passover for the first time in more than a decade. Here's another thing, since Robbie, you're expanding, I'm going to expand one more step. Typically, when someone who is ritually impure touches someone who is ritually pure, she touches Jesus, then Jesus becomes impure. Instead, she became pure. And this is like this is basically unknown in this world.
And he does it with the leper too.
Right.
When he touches the leper, he doesn't have to. There's other accounts where Jesus is not touching lepers to make them well.
Yes.
But this one he does. And again, it turns the situation up on its head. But Jesus is intentional with this woman because 12 years she's had this issue of blood, and he is publicly, I believe, calling her out.
Yes.
For her benefit.
Right. When Jesus takes the little girl by the hand, I don't know if you ever noticed this, but when Peter does the same thing with a little girl, they both get the same result, but Peter doesn't touch that dead body. He's not going to become ritually impure. It doesn't matter to Jesus. He touches the dead body. When Jesus touches the bier, the cot that the young man was being carried on at Nain, Jesus becomes ritually impure at that point. Same way with being around a grave, around Lazarus's grave, or same thing with the little girl. Jesus should be becoming ritually impure, but not according to his halakha, not according to the way that he understood ritual purity and ritual impurity. The power of his perfection, of his holiness, of his person is overwhelming, is overpowering that source of impurity, be it the dead little girl, Lazarus's tomb, or the cot that the young man was being carried out to be buried in Luke 7. And so all of these dots connect. And I kept wondering, okay, if Jesus is an observant Jew, then why will he take a vessel and drink from it that a Samaritan woman offers him? Why will he touch a dead person, touch a leper, touch a person like this woman who's ritually impure? And it was just, there were too many exceptions to the rule, too many disconnects. And then I was doing research on something completely unrelated. And all of a sudden, I found myself in a section of the Mishnah that's talking about ritual purity, and the rabbis have a principle. And I wrote on this in Jesus and Ritual Purity. There's a little short article. It's like 6 or 7 pages. And I was able to figure out what the organizing principle was, what the big picture operating principle was going on in the background that Jesus is employing, that connects all of those dots and explains why it is that Jesus is walking so out of step with everybody else on this matter of ritual purity. And it's a statement that the rabbis say over and over and over when they're trying to figure out, well, what about this situation? How do we rule there? What do we do about that particular situation? And they say, for it is the way of impurity to go out, not to come in. And so Jesus teaches this in the Gospel of Matthew. Hear and understand, not what comes into a man's body that defiles a man, but is what goes out, because it's out of the abundance of the heart that the mouth speaks. It's out of the abundance of the heart that theft and murder and all of this other stuff happens. Impurity comes from inside. It doesn't go in. And what he was saying was this principle that the rabbis have been using to adjudicate all these other difficult to solve situations, that principle should be applied to this, to all of life, not just certain aspects of life. In other words, he's saying, if you're going to do it by the book, just like with the woman caught in adultery, do it consistently all the way by the same principle. Take this principle that you've always applied to external matters and apply it to the internal as well. Then you will be living a covenantally consistent life under the sovereignty of God and pleasing in his sight. So Jesus has really got some really cool stuff going on there. Thank you, Robbie.
Yeah, he did it again. You mentioned the demoniac on the other side, the Gentile, the Decapolis. It says look at the text, it says when Jesus gets out of the boat and when Jesus gets back into the boat, there's no indication that these disciples get out of the boat with him. They're appalled because he's about to encounter a naked, bloody, demon-possessed man living amongst pigs in a graveyard.
Living in the tomb, so he's ritually impure because he's been in the graveyard. Yeah.
5 times over. Yeah. And so when Jesus got out of the boat, no indication that these scaredy cats are even getting out of the boat.
they didn't understand what he understood. This fully integrated, holistic life that he's embraced says it is the way of impurity to go out, not to come in. What makes a person impure is what he does and what he says, not what he eats, not what he touches. And Jesus was, I mean, we have no idea in a goy, non-Jewish, Gentile, 21st century Western world, we don't understand how strong that was, how deeply that whole ritual purity system had been ingrained into the average person. And Jesus comes along and he goes, here's a way that you can live a more integrated, more holistic, more complete life, a more consistent life under God. And that is, apply this whole thing across the board. And then it's, to me, this is beautiful. Jesus is teaching the same thing that he is doing. Jesus is doing the same thing that he is teaching. Even in that, he is fully integrated. He says, do what the Pharisees teach, but don't do what they do, because they preach, but they don't practice. Jesus could never be convicted of living that kind of an inconsistent life where what he says doesn't match up with what he does, or vice versa. He is doing and saying the same thing. And man, that's a master I can follow right there. That's a Jesus I can give the rest of my life for. As somebody that's going to waffle or be inconsistent, or his do doesn't match up with his say, I wouldn't be able to swing with that kind of a master. I can follow that kind of a master.
Well, it's interesting. Some of the laws were anything that was an emission or skin disease, and this is all in Torah, that people thought it was contaminated, and so like lepers had to call out and stuff. And it just seems that Jesus' power was so powerful. In my mind, when I thought about this, I came up with a thought. I don't know what you think about it, but it's like he goes against the second law of thermodynamics. Everything kind of runs downhill. So when purity and impurity touch, clean water and dirty water, you're going to have a lot of dirty water. And yet in Jesus' experience, when clean and unclean touch, everything becomes clean. It just is so amazing. So that's just kind of how, with my mind, I've tried to work it through.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I guess if you boiled it down to, if Jesus, and he's such, in one sense, he's so unassuming. He could have said something like this. Man, I know I would have. If I had the God card in my pocket, would have said, are you actually saying that God could become unclean? Is that what I'm hearing you argue? But he never fronts anybody up quite to that extent. He hints around all over the place. That's kind of this operating assumption. Are you saying that just because I chose to become flesh and dwell among you full of grace and truth, that then you can contaminate me with the crud that you've turned this world that I created into? Oh no, behold, I make all things new.
Well, he probably mikvah'd, we don't know. I would imagine he did a mikvah, which is interesting. But we don't see him go to the temple after he's healed somebody or touched somebody with a contamination or with a dead person. But we do hear him say to tell the lepers, go to the priest and show yourself. And I just would have loved to have been there on the wall with a priest freaking out when they've kept this formula for hundreds and maybe even thousands of years, and then never had to implement it until the guys were healed. And they asked, well, how did this happen? And they gave witness.
Yeah. So many times, Lynn, I wish I was there. When I watch these Jesus movies on TV, and I know that Hollywood cannot do what the God of the universe is able to do in terms of miracle and splitting Red Seas and delivering people in one day and these kinds of super things. They can't, what we see on, it brings me to tears what they're able to do just using Steven Spielberg, graphics and stuff, animation, whatever. But to think that this God that became flesh, he actually did that stuff, and I wish I could have been there. I mean, I love y'all and all that, but if I had the choice, first century, 21st century, I don't know, maybe it's just a history buff in me or something like that. I want to be there. Okay, well, that's just not going to happen ever. We get one shot at this. Even the beer commercial got that right. You go around once in life, and Hebrew says it's appointed for a man once to die, and after that comes the judgment. Okay, I got that. So I'm never getting back to that first century, not in the, phone booth, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure kind of. I'm never going back there. How do I, so what's my hope? How can I hope to experience this stuff without having actually been there, knowing what it was like, knowing the dynamics, smelling the poop, hearing the sounds, hearing the yelling in the streets, and the Hebrew being, sung by the school kids? And how is that going to happen for me? Well, one is going to the land of Israel. All right, that's one way you take a step back in time when you go there. Another is you go back there in a literary kind of way, studying the stuff that we've been studying. That's as going where it happened and reading the stuff that make up the culture and the language and the religious practices and the cultural practices and all of that stuff, the beliefs of people and stuff. That's as close as we're going to get to a time machine. So that's one of the reasons I want that. I want to feel like an original participant in the story. And I can't. I won't ever be able to do that. Not like one of the original participants, but I can get closer than we've ever been able to get before with all this database stuff. Safaria.org. Oh my goodness. Talk about a whole library on your cell phone with all of this stuff, Josephus, Philo, rabbinic literature, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Apocrypha, the pseudepigraphical stuff. There's just so much stuff there that if we keep bumping it hard enough, we keep making one step closer and another step closer and another step closer, and we're almost there. We're almost there.
It feels like each piece of information breaks off a shell of like all that we've learned or come into it with. Going to the land takes off a layer. And I remember the first time I heard a little boy say the word Abba on an airplane flying to Israel. And I feel like it cracked open something where I just could have a greater understanding of what that word meant. And then these, each time you go to the land, each time you study these other texts. And I have to say that I love Safaria, but it's, I think, impacting my work product at work, because all I want to do is read the ancient text, and every word that I come up in a Bible study, I'm like, oh, I wonder if I could search that in the ancient texts. And so it's pretty addictive, but I thank you for that.
You are so in trouble, Mary. You have been bitten by the bug.
Yeah.
You should have worn a mask to class.
I'm telling you. And
that is so awesome.
God is, yeah. And the thing is it's so easy to share with people that even people that are not educated or don't have a lot of sophistication with books, an app is easy to share. So I've been able to share it with the people that I'm discipling, and it's pretty exciting.
That's awesome. Good for you. Good on you, as the Canadians say.
Doctor, have you been to Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia yet?
No, I have not been to Saudi at all. I've been to St. Catherine's and the traditional Mount Sinai multiple times, but I've never been to Saudi.
There's a bunch of YouTubes on it, and they're actually having tours and all that now. So,
Interesting.
just for people that don't know about it, pretty easy to find on YouTube.
Very good.
You would love what they're finding there. One of my favorites, besides, well, I mean, the altars are still there, the cave of Elijah, you know, the rock transformed. It just goes on and on. Again, this ties into the Ron Wyatt discoveries. He's actually the one that did the major work on that. He was actually even imprisoned for 70 days with his sons for doing that. I can't remember what, I think that was in the 90s. But anyway, they have one of my favorites is they have engravings of feet, you know, outline of the shoe or the sandal, like all the way around a big area of it, like possession. You know, there's many that they have found of those.
There are some of those that were found by Adam Zertal in the land of Israel as well. Maybe that does connect. Who knows? Somebody else? Okay, well, we're down to 2 pages of people, I see. And so I think that means that, oh my goodness, it's 10 o'clock. Okay, I'm sure you guys have other things to do, right? Right? Yeah. So thanks for hanging in here with me a little bit later, for taking the journey from Jerusalem to Jericho and falling among thieves. And I trust that the Lord will have met you in all of this stuff that we have studied, the goal of which has all been to shed more light on this most important life ever lived. And now all we need to do is kind of keep going in the direction that you chose to go about 6 or so weeks ago, whenever you signed up, and keep pushing the envelope, keep turning the pages, keep studying. But more important than that is live it. So good night. God bless each of you. Thanks for spending all this time with me. It's been a privilege. Lila Tov.
Lila Tov.
Thank you so much.
you.
Thank you. Shalom, shalom.
Shalom.
Shalom lekulam.
תודה רבה.
Ein baya.
Thank you.
Bekef bishvili.